direct ammunition.
Right.
And why did you do that?
Because Friday, when I was in the store, I had just bought the ammunition. I'd never asked the lady, or it was just there, and I knew it was shotgun ammunition. But that's all I knew, and I just bought it. I didn't really think about it and loaded it in the gun. And sometime that evening or on the trip, I started thinking that maybe this ammunition didn't work with this particular gun, and that there might be some difference. So I would just decided the next day to go to a store and ask somebody there what they recommended.
How many boxes of ammunition did you buy on Friday, August the 18th?
I believe one or two, but I think one.
And do you remember how many rounds of ammunition were contained in that one box?
I don't remember. They were these square, like yellow and blue boxes, and the shells were sort of lined up. Might have been 16 or 12 or something like that.
What happened to the box of ammunition after you killed your parents?
The box of that ammunition, they were all in the car.
And that's your brother's car?
Right.
Were they discarded?
I discarded them and everything. They were sort of all over because I had been getting shells out, and they were sort of mixed up. But I discarded everything that I saw at the gas station, and then some of the stuff was still in there, and I discarded the next day, Monday.
Now, you heard the coroner testify, did you not, that there was birdshot and buckshot recovered from the bodies of your parents. Do you remember that testimony,
Right.
sir?
Yes.
Did you buy birdshot or buckshot when you bought the first box in San Diego, if you know?
Well, I didn't know the difference at the time, but I guess it's birdshot in San Diego.
Why do you say that?
Well, just from what the coroner said, that he said that almost all the shots were buckshot, and I had changed the ammunition, so I knew that it would have to be all buckshot. So it had to be the new ammunition.
So the new ammunition was the buckshot, is that
Right.
correct?
Correct.
Okay, but you didn't know on Saturday, the 19th of August, that the ammunition you'd purchased the day before was birdshot and therefore not as lethal? Is that correct?
Right.
Okay. So when you went to this gun shop, and where was the gun shop you went to on Saturday, August the 19th?
Somewhere in Van Nuys, I believe, off Sepulveda somewhere.
Near here.
Yes.
And when you went to that particular shop, was it a sporting goods store? Was it a gun shop? What kind of store was it?
No, it was if I remember, it was a very small store. Just a real tiny square store, and there was a counter. And then there was a bunch of ammunition lined up on one wall, and then he had lots of guns in there, and there were some people in there looking around and buying things, asking questions, I guess. And at some point I got the gentleman's attention, and then we had he had a long discussion with me about ammunitions and different types of ammunitions, and was pretty forceful and knew a lot about it, obviously, and just basically took a box off the shelf and said, "This is what you want." So that's what I bought.
Did you describe to him the kind of gun that you had, or did you bring it with you?
No, I didn't have to get that far, because he said that the sense I got from the conversation was it didn't matter. But I may have described the gun in some way, but I don't think I got technical. I certainly didn't give him any particulars. What I learned, I believe, was just that this was the ammunition I needed, and that was the only thing that stayed in my mind. And I bought that, and I had intended to just use that ammunition in the gun and reload the gun. I just had not done it Sunday.
Well, did you take an example or one of the...
No, I never brought the ammunition into the store.
Well, how did you know what gauge to get?
I didn't. I just bought shotgun ammunition that was stacked up. They had it like in a pyramid stack.
Was that Was that at the Big Five that it was in the pyramid?
Right.
Okay, now when you went to see this man in Van Nuys, you told him that you were unsure about the ammunition you'd already purchased, or what did you say to him about what you'd already purchased?
I don't remember exactly, but I told him that I had bought shotguns, and he may have asked what kind or something, and I may have given him some description. I don't remember exactly. And then he was going into a discussion about what would be the kind of ammunition you buy for home protection and so on. And it was really a long discussion. He had a lot of information, and I didn't absorb all of it. Basically, I was just there to find out what I should have, and he basically just picked it out for me. So I bought it.
And is your testimony then that the majority of the shots fired were from this ammunition that you purchased on Saturday, correct?
Right.
And that therefore, from the coroner's testimony, that must have been buckshot that you purchased on Saturday, correct?
Yes.
And I believe you indicated something about home security. Did you tell this gentleman that you needed the ammunition to shoot at people or birds or ducks or any kind of other hunting?
No, there was just, I'm sure he asked. Again, I don't remember the conversation exactly, but I believe I just told him the same thing that I told all the other people, that whenever she talked about what gun or whatever, just that I needed it for protection. And I think they just assumed it was home protection in case there was a burglar or something of that sort.
How did you pick out this particular gun shop?
My brother found it out of the phone book.
Was your brother with you when you did this?
Yes.
Was he inside of the store with you?
Yes, I believe so.
And how did you get there?
We drove. Whose
car?
Eric's.
After you acquired this new ammunition, how many boxes did you buy of it?
1 or 2 boxes. Again, I don't know why I can't remember, but more than likely I bought 2 boxes, but I really don't remember.
And you paid for it with cash, is that correct?
Yes.
You did not use your father's American Express credit card for this transaction, correct?
No.
And you did not use your father's American Express credit card to purchase the shotguns the day before, correct?
No.
And there was a reason that you didn't use a credit card, correct?
Right.
You didn't want any trail to lead to the purchase of these weapons and the ammunition, correct?
No, he was buying them with Donovan Goodrow's license. It was going to be hard to put Joseph Menendez's credit card down and pay for it, so, I mean, that couldn't happen.
Okay, so you couldn't have been Joseph Menendez with your brother being Donovan Goodrow, correct?
I could have been, but there just wasn't any need. We had lots of cash, and we just thought we'd buy it with cash.
So you didn't think about the fact that there might be a trail leading back to you if you'd used your father's credit card, correct?
No.
But when you used the U.S. Sprint card on Sunday night to make the phone call to Perry Berman, you wanted there to be a paper trail, didn't you?
No. No, I didn't. And in fact, I have a memory of I remember telling the police that I'd made these calls at the Civic Center, and I have a memory that they checked and did not find records, and that I was told that, and my answer was, I made the calls. And I just didn't click in my mind that I had made them on the Sprint card, and therefore they wouldn't show up. I just assumed they would show up, I guess, and I don't know why they couldn't find them. And I remember this, and I actually remember at some point my attorneys telling me that they could not find the records and so on, and I really didn't have any answer for that. And then eventually, after searching, found it on the Sprint records. There was no particular reason.
But you had cash enough to buy the ammunition on the 19th, correct?
Right.
And you had cash to buy the guns on the 18th, correct?
Right.
And you had no cash to put into a payphone to make a phone call from Santa Monica to West Hollywood, where Perry Berman lived, correct?
Well, I would need dimes. I mean, I don't know if I had any on me. I really was just totally in the habit of using Sprint credit cards, and I guess I don't know if that sounds strange or not, but that's just what I always did. And certainly when I didn't tell the police when they asked, or if they did, hey, check the Sprint cards you'll see, or something like that. I mean.
But that would have looked very prepared, too, if you'd volunteered to the police that it was your father's business that was the cause of this homicide, and that you had a U.S. Sprint record which would prove that you were at the Santa Monica at 11:07, and had given them other details like that. That would have looked pretty prepared, wouldn't it?
Honestly, I just used a Sprint card because I just used Sprint cards. If I would have had 2 dimes, I'd just as easily put 2 dimes in the phone.
Now, I believe you indicated then that you wanted to have a different kind of ammunition. For what reason? You wanted to make sure you had the right ammunition? Is that correct?
I just wasn't, no, I wanted to make sure, yeah, as far as whether it would work, yes.
The correct ammunition for what purpose?
So that if I had to fire the gun, it would fire.
And that when you fired the gun, it would cause damage?
Well, I assumed if I had ammunition in there, it would cause damage either way, but my main concern was that I would fire something and it was just not the right shell for that gun, and it just would misfire or something would happen of that sort. So I just figured I'd just go back the next day and get whatever ammunition was supposed to get.
Did you ever practice using the shotgun before Sunday night?
No.
You never went off into someplace in Los Angeles County and shot the gun to see if it worked?
No.
Now, I believe you indicated then that you wanted to have the correct ammunition. So after you went, what time was it that you went to Van Nuys and talked to this man and got the boxes of ammunition?
Somewhere between, like, between 12, 1, and around 12, 1 or 2 o'clock, somewhere in there.
And then you went back to your home, is that correct?
Well, we drove around until I felt we were late enough that we could go home without it being suspicious and us needing a big explanation.
Okay, so would it be your testimony then that you didn't have time once you got home to reload the shotguns before you had to go on this fishing trip, is that correct?
Right, I didn't have time because I drove in and it was just like my mom had everything ready and we ended up leaving within a few minutes.
And you really didn't want to go on this fishing trip, correct?
Right.
So you told your mother that you were sick and that you couldn't go on the trip, right?
No.
Well, Mr. Menendez, when you were a student, did you ever say that you were sick so you could get out of doing things?
Yes.
So you knew how to do that, right?
Yeah, I could do that with a teacher for some reason. I don't remember any specific instance, but I'm sure I did it. But I don't think you could do that with my dad, and not this weekend. This isn't a weekend like every other time. This isn't like school or something. You know, this was like a crisis thing. Everybody was very nervous. All 4 of us, I'm sure. Certainly my brother and I. And I don't think that something strange like that would just, my dad would go, oh, okay, you're sick, you can stay home. I would not have done that.
So you immediately went from the driveway of your parents' home to their car to the fishing trip, is that correct?
Yeah, we don't have a driveway. It's just there's like the front door, the cars, a gate, and the street.
Well, there's a driveway into where the cars are parked, correct?
Not really, I don't believe so. I mean, it's the sidewalk, the gate, and then the carport.
All right, so you immediately went from the carport where you were with your brother and his escort
Right.
into your parents' car without going back inside the house, is that correct?
No, I think we were able to walk inside the house, and well, I remember my mother, I believe, coming out and meeting us. I saw my mother first, and then it seemed like everything was ready. They had some bags they wanted to take, and I just sort of got caught in I remember just feeling like, I don't know if I really want to go, and what should I do here? And my brother looking sort of to me for support and what should we do, and just getting caught up and going. Next thing I know, I was having a discussion about whether we could take 2 cars, and I lost that discussion, and I was driving to the boat trip.
The bags that you just mentioned, did these bags look like they were big enough to hold rifles?
They were just duffel bags, whatever.
Were you frightened of the bags?
No.
Well, you indicated that you were very frightened of this trip. Okay, what did you think was going to happen on the trip to you?
I thought that they had arranged to kill us on this trip in a way that would be, nobody would be around for sure.
So that they could tell their friends that they'd gone fishing with you on a boat and the 4 of you had left together and only 2 people had come back and they don't know what happened to you. Is that what you thought your parents were going to say to their friends and family after you failed to come back from the trip?
No, I'm sure they wouldn't say that. They could say any of a number of things, but I'm sure it wouldn't be too hard to make an excuse or just say they went and we were home and they got back and we had run away or something.
You'd run away on the boat?
Well, obviously they would not have told people we went on the boat with them. If they mentioned that they went at all, they would not have said we went on the boat.
Did your father's secretary make any of the arrangements for this fishing trip?
I had no idea. I was told by my parents earlier, and then I was talked to my mom Friday, and that's all I knew. Although I knew that it was supposed to be for a business reason.
Now, when you came home from the fishing trip, you still had the ammunition in Eric's car then, is that correct?
Yeah.
And was that the same car that you took to UCLA to speak to your brother?
Yes.
And then when you came home, you immediately reloaded your weapon with your new ammunition, correct?
No, we got home quite confused over what had happened on the trip and basically immediately left and went to UCLA.
Right, and when you came home from UCLA, you had access then at that time to go back into your guest house and get your gun and load it with the new ammunition, right?
Yes, but the door was locked and my brother couldn't get in and all the doors were locked, so I rang the doorbell and my mother came down.
And then after your mother came down, ultimately you got into the guest house, correct?
Well, eventually, after I had the argument with my mother, my brother and I talked again, and then I eventually went to the guest house. But, you know, all these things were taking place. The trip, the thing that my mother said, going to UCLA, I just didn't think about it. I was just in the guest house. I didn't think about it.
But you were in fear for your life from Thursday night through Sunday night. And you said it kept getting worse, correct?
Yes, it kept getting worse.
Okay, so why didn't you just, at that time, reload your weapon?
Because I wasn't thinking clearly. I was afraid, and it was getting worse, and there were lots of things happening, and I just wasn't thinking that organized.
I believe you indicated that during the day on the 20th, on Sunday the 20th of August, that a couple of things happened which increased your fear level. Is that correct?
Right.
One of them was that your father had lied to Perry Berman about you being away from the house. And you took that to be very ominous, correct?
I did.
And when you found that out, you were in the guest house, correct?
No.
Didn't Perry Berman tell you over the phone that your father had indicated that you were away at the Beverly Center?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember where I was. Yeah, I guess I was in the guest house. Yeah.
I believe you indicated you only went into the house one time that day, and that was during this attempt to get your parents to speak to you, correct?
Yeah, that's right. I think I went in the one time. I don't know. I mean, I think I probably went into the kitchen area for food and stuff, so I may have gone in again.
Are you having trouble remembering the events of that afternoon, August the 20th?
Yes.
This is a very important occasion in your life, isn't it?
It's a very bad one, yes.
Okay, and you've had a considerable amount of time to think about what happened, haven't you?
Yes.
And you're now saying that you might have gone back into the house for another reason, that is to go to the kitchen. Is that correct?
I'm sure I went to the kitchen to get food at some point. You know, I have memories of the things that made me more afraid, or the things that happened that just stick in my memory as important for some reason, but not every conversation, every movement, everything I did, and certainly not how the thoughts were going through my head is not easy to remember. So sometimes I try to think back and say, well, I do remember eating at some point, I just don't remember it very well.
Is it a question of remembering it, Mr. Menendez, or is it a question of creating?
I don't want to create, so that's why sometimes I just don't remember. So I just say I don't remember. And if I remember vaguely, then I remember vaguely and I try my best.
So, in addition to your father saying something to you about tennis camp, which made you very upset, and Mr. Berman's telling you that your father had lied about you being at the Beverly Center.
Right.
Okay. Those are the two things that happened before 9:45 that night that made you believe that your life was more in danger than ever, correct?
No. There was what my brother told me in the morning when he woke me up. And then it goes all the way back. There was my mom's statement. It was it was just the feeling of the weekend and what had happened Thursday. I mean, it wasn't any particular thing. Like you said, it was just growing in me. And I was thinking, I think, less and less clearly.
Well, in the morning when your brother came to you between 7 and 9 a.m. and told you about this horrible thing that had happened the night before, why didn't you then reload this weapon?
I didn't think about it, ma'am. it was in the car, and it just wasn't something that I was thinking clearly about. And until I actually needed the gun, suddenly it didn't come into my mind.
So then I believe you indicated that at approximately 9:45 that night, your brother returned home, and the last time you had seen him before that was at noon, correct?
Right.
And so, to your knowledge, he was away from the house for approximately 9 hours and 45 minutes?
Correct.
And I believe that you first noticed that your brother had returned. Was that before or after your mother had told you that you couldn't go to the movies?
Before. Right before.
Your brother came home right before then, is that correct?
Right.
And where was this conversation with your mother? Was it in the foyer?
She was standing in the doorway and between the den and the foyer, and I was standing facing her in the foyer.
I believe you indicated after she informed you that you couldn't go to the movies, and your father and mother went into the den and closed the doors. It was then that you decided that death was near. Is that correct?
More than near, I thought that we were going to die, and it was going to happen.
When your father closed the doors to the den, did he tell you, tonight you die?
No, he never said that.
Did he say anything to you threatening at all before he closed the doors?
Well, I took everything that was happening to be extremely threatening, but he never said what you just said. It wasn't you're going to die tonight or anything like that.
Was this the first time in your life that your father had ever closed a door so that he could have a private conversation with someone?
No.
That should cause some speculation.
All right, overall, natural step.
No, it isn't. This weekend is very different than other weekends in my life and other door closings. It meant something to me when he did it that night.
But there was nothing obvious about what he had done. In other words, he didn't threaten you, he didn't have a weapon, he didn't do anything out of the ordinary, correct?
Well, yes, he closed the doors, and they were open all day, and they're normally open, and for some reason he closed them to shut himself off, and so I wouldn't see whatever was going on in the room.
Did you think perhaps he wanted to have a private conversation with your mother?
No, I didn't.
Had he ever had a private conversation with your mother? Had you ever seen your mother and father go into a room before and close the door during the 21 years before you killed your parents?
Probably.
But on this particular night, that act of closing the door was the last straw. Is that correct?
It wasn't the last straw. It was the last thing I remember before I panicked.
But between the time of the door closing and the time of you starting to shoot, you had no other contact with your parents. Is that correct?
Right.
And you made no attempt to look through the French doors or the door from the kitchen or any other windows into that room to see what your parents were doing in there, correct? You made no
Right.
attempt.
Right.
Now, I think you indicated yesterday that when you went into that room with your shotgun, you thought your parents were out looking for you, correct?
Well, I said that I didn't know what they were doing, and I figured that they were going to come looking for us, yes. I mean, in that sense, yes. But they might be in the kitchen, they might have walked out the back, and we really didn't know exactly because there had been some period of time that went by while I was running. So we couldn't be sure.
So you sent your brother to the kitchen with his weapon. You stood at the French doors into the room in order to trap them inside the room, correct?
No.
You went into that room and started firing your weapon before you even knew what your parents were doing, didn't you?
Yes, we were in a panic.
Your Honor, I have here a photograph. I'd like to mark it as Exhibit 250, please. Mr. Menendez, I believe you indicated yesterday when we were discussing Exhibit 20 up here that the coffee table was not in the position that is demonstrated in other words, when you went into the room, the coffee table was not at an angle to the sofa, but was rather parallel to the sofa. Would that be correct?
That's the way I remember it, yeah.
Okay, and that's how your parents normally kept the coffee table, that is, parallel to the sofa?
Right.
Okay. And you've seen the photographs of the crime scene, correct?
Not really, other than when they were on the board, but I was trying not to see them.
Well, in the photographs, the coffee table appears to be similar to the diagram People's 20, that is, that it's at an angle, as if it's been moved, correct?
Yes, I noticed that, and I had assumed that the people that went in the room moved them.
I'm going to object. I do not believe that the position of the table is the same as in the photographs. I think it mistakes the evidence.
Okay, I'll rephrase the question.
All right.
That the photographs reflect that the table is not parallel to this part of the sofa where your father was seated, but is at an angle.
I'm going to object to that because that misstates the bulk of the crime scene photographs.
Your Honor, may I have a moment, please, then?
Certainly.
May we approach to be heard on this issue, Your Honor?
Well, let the prosecutor find the photographs that they're looking for first. All right.
Your Honor, I have here another photograph which I've shown to counsel. I'd like to take mark as Exhibit 251, please.
Yes.
First, please.
Yes.
Mr. Menendez, I'm showing you a photograph which has been marked as Exhibit 251. I'd like to ask you to look at the coffee table in its relationship to the sofa in this photograph. Do you see the coffee table?
Yes.
Now, in the photograph, does it appear to you that the coffee table is at an angle?
No.
It is not at an angle to the sofa? It's parallel to the sofa? Is that your testimony?
It seems, I guess it could be a slight angle, yeah.
Is this the way the coffee table looked when you went in and killed your parents?
I have no idea.
Is this the way the coffee table looked when you went back in and picked up the shells?
It looks basically like that, I guess, yeah. Really don't remember. It's certainly nowhere near like that picture.
All right,
This is a
so-
very slight angle in that picture, and this is
Referring to a picture or a diagram?
this diagram is very badly distorted from that picture.
All right, so it's your testimony then that the angle of the coffee table to the sofa in the photograph 251 is more accurate of what you recall than certainly Exhibit 20. Is that correct?
Definitely.
All right. Now, when you went into that room and you shot your parents, they were eating blueberries and ice cream.
Objection, Your Honor. This states the evidence.
What were they doing?
I'd like to approach on that.
Objection overruled, or objection sustained as to that question since the prosecution has withdrawn it, and the objection is, or the request to approach is denied.
What were they doing? Your parents?
I just remember going in, it's dark, and the really only thing I remember very well is somebody coming toward me on the right, more like a shadow.
And what was the shadow doing to threaten you?
Just, he was coming toward me, but that wasn't so much the thing that he was doing to threaten me. It was that I believed that they were in the process of killing us, and that's why I had run in the room. By that point, I had been sprinting around the house and had come in.
Your father wasn't doing anything to threaten you at the time that you fired the first shot at him, was he?
I felt he was going to kill me.
And what was he doing with his hands?
Counsel, is there a need for you to be up there?
I'm sorry, I was about to show him a photo, Your Honor. What was he doing with his hands?
I don't remember. I just remember something coming toward me.
Showing you this photograph 250, it appears to be a photograph of the top of the coffee table taken at the time that the other photographs were taken. Do you recognize the items in photograph 250 on top of the coffee table?
I don't recognize them, but there are things that were in the house on the table, I guess.
Do you recognize the glasses that are here? There appears to be a glass with liquid, then there's another glass that appears to have a spoon and some white substance. Do you recognize those as being the glasses that your family used to drink from?
Yes.
And you see there's a Michael Jackson cassette tape here.
Right.
Did your family have a Michael Jackson cassette tape?
I'm sure they did.
It looks like a cigarette lighter.
Right.
Your parents smoked.
Right.
Okay, and there appears to be some papers here from UCLA. Do you see those papers here?
Yes.
And your brother was about to go to UCLA, wasn't he?
Yes.
Now, what on this coffee table was threatening to you?
Nothing.
And your father, you couldn't see his hand, so you didn't know what he was doing with his hands when you went into the room, correct?
Right.
What was your mother doing when you went in that room?
Don't remember well, ma'am. Just basically over to the left. I remember there was another person there.
And you assumed the other person was your mother since she'd
Yes.
gone into the room with your father, correct?
I didn't know at that point, but I did at some point. I know now it was my mother. At some point I understood that, yes.
You weren't sure it was your mother that you were shooting?
I'm not sure exactly what point I realized that the person to the left was my mother.
Did you shoot the person to your left when you first went in before you reloaded?
No.
Who shot that person then?
I don't know. I was just shooting at the person closest to me and coming toward me, and I was sort of firing not well, sort of all over, so it's possible that I shot in that direction, but I don't remember doing that.
Mr. Menendez, there were only 2 shots that went through the French doors, and all the other shots appear to have hit their targets. Did you hear that from the coroner's testimony?
I don't remember it exactly, but
States the testimony. The coroner didn't testify.
Objection sustained, the answer is stricken.
Your parents were hit many, many times, correct?
yes.
And you didn't know what you were doing?
I knew that I was firing at them.
Now, when your father, I believe you indicated you are the one that put the shotgun up to the back of your father's head and pulled the trigger, correct?
Yes.
What was he doing when you did that to him?
I don't know.
Was that the first shot that you fired when you got into the room?
No, that was shots later.
Was your father threatening you when you put the gun to the back of his head and pulled the trigger?
I don't remember any conscious thing that he was threatening me. There's no thought of that. It was just that they're gonna kill us. This is it. We've been knowing that this might happen all weekend. So it was there. It was just sort of, I was just reacting to what I was feeling. I was just reacting. I don't remember any specific movements or anything that would have been more threatening until I saw or heard something that caused me to feel threatened.
Where was your father physically located when you put the gun to the back of his head and pulled the trigger?
I don't remember.
Was he seated or was he standing?
I guess I was over him because I believe I was a little to the side of the couch.
May I approach, please?
Yes.
Then would it be your testimony, Mr. Menendez, that after you came into the room, through the doors here, on the left part of Exhibit 20, you started firing at your father, who was in the area right here where his body was later found, correct?
Right.
And could you tell if your first shot hit him?
I couldn't tell, but I believe it did. I'm pretty sure it did, actually.
You claimed that he was rising up towards you. Did you see him thrown back into the seated position on the sofa?
I didn't see him rising up toward me. I saw him moving toward me. And he was standing. He was not rising. He was standing.
He was actually standing during this first shot.
Yes, he was.
Okay, and then what did you do next?
I just kept firing.
Did you see your father fall down into the sofa where his body was later found?
And he may have. I
And now-
don't remember it.
When you put the gun up against the back of his head and you pulled the trigger, did you go around behind the sofa to do that?
Well, I didn't put it up against his head on purpose. I just don't remember it, but I know that I did that because of the picture, and I know that was me in that area. But I did not I have no memory of actually doing that. It was just a rush and firing. And I know that I ended up on that side of the sofa because I remember looking in that direction.
Okay, so you know you were behind the sofa because you remember looking out in the direction of the television, correct?
Yeah, not really behind the sofa, but over to the left of it, right there.
Between this table and the sofa?
Right.
And you recall being there?
Right.
And you recall shooting him from that angle?
I don't think I actually remember that, but I know that I did.
Well, when you said you didn't do it on purpose, you didn't put the gun up against his head on purpose, are you saying that was an accident?
I'm saying that it wasn't intentionally done in that way. I was just firing, and I was afraid, and I was firing all over. You know, I was trying to hit the things that I saw, and I wasn't thinking consciously any particular way I was going to try and do it when I went in.
Mr. Menendez, you were not unconscious during this, were you?
No.
And you were not on drugs, right?
No, ma'am.
And you were not drunk.
No.
And you did not have any physical impairment at that time either, did you?
No.
When you went behind the area, when you went in the area behind the sofa and you unintentionally put the gun against your father's head and pulled the trigger, where was your mother?
Objection, this states the testimony.
She was, my memory is not good on this, but I think I remember her. Seemed to be around the side of the coffee table.
What was she doing?
In my mind, she was just sort of sneaking around the side of the coffee table and going in that direction. She had been standing, and now she was in a forward position. I don't actually remember movement, but I believe that's what I remember it looked like. But it could also be something that I heard.
You said your mother was sneaking? Is that correct? You just used that term, sneaking. Is that correct?
Yes.
And did you think that she was going to do something sneaky to you when she was crawling behind the coffee table?
No, I thought that we were in danger still.
You thought you were in danger?
I know that something about that freaked me out and caused me to run out of the room to the point where I would come back, or I would never have.
Okay, so something caused you to run out of the room, correct?
Right.
And this is after you'd shot your father in the head, correct?
Right.
And so your father was not going to help your mother anymore, correct?
I really wasn't thinking that, ma'am. I didn't know what, I wasn't thinking as it was happening. This happened so fast. I was just reacting. It was just, I remember bursting in the room. I remember some very vague things, and then I remember it being over. And I remember dropping my gun barely and slumping against the wall. I wasn't thinking each step of the way what I was doing.
Okay, so when you
It
went
didn't
running
happen
out
that
of
way.
when you went running out of the room, you went to the phone and you called 911 and you said, "I need help." Correct?
No.
Okay. And you said you weren't thinking, it was just you were reacting, correct?
Right.
Okay. But 10 minutes later, you went back and got the shotgun shells because of fingerprints, correct?
10 minutes later.
Now, at the time that your mother died, she was about 48 years old, right?
Yes.
Was she in good physical condition?
I really don't remember whether she was or not.
Was she overweight?
I believe so.
She'd been depressed for a long period of time, hadn't she?
Yes.
What threat did your mother pose to you when you ran out of the room to reload?
Nothing that I can remember that was in my mind specifically, other than the same fear that caused me to go in the room and me reacting and something freaking me out more to the point where I ran out and ran back in, or I never would have. And I just remember that I did it.
So where did you go when you ran out of the room?
I went toward the front doors and through the front doors about a few steps.
And when you went out the front door, that was the front door that faced Elm Street, is that correct?
Right.
And when you went out the front door, where did you go?
I didn't go anywhere. My brother was there, and he was doing something with ammunition, I believe. I don't remember very well, but I remember getting a shell from him. I may have told him to give me a shell. He may have handed it to me. I don't remember.
How many new rounds did you put into your gun?
Just the one as I was running back.
1 round, is that correct?
Right.
Okay, now, I believe you indicated that the ammunition that you reloaded your gun with was a different color than the ammunition which was already in your gun. Do you
No.
understand my question?
I think we know that now, but I didn't think about the color at that point. I was thinking about the colors beforehand when I was trying to get the kind that I knew for sure worked.
Okay.
But after that, I really wasn't thinking.
When you reloaded before you went in to kill your parents, how did you get the old rounds that were in the gun out of the gun? What mechanism did you use to get those rounds out, and how many rounds did you take out?
Took out all of them.
Which is how many?
I don't know. It was frantic, and I think you just pump it and it comes out, I believe. Pretty sure.
How did you know that?
Just from having worked the gun and the people explaining the gun to me at some point, and was not complicated, that part anyway.
So getting the shells out of the gun was not complicated before you went in to kill your parents, correct?
Right.
Okay. Now, we are at the point where you went back outside after you saw your mother sneaking. You went back outside and your brother gave you 1 round. Is that correct?
Yes.
Why didn't you put in more?
Because I was scared and trying to get back to the room as fast as possible, and I just didn't spend time to do more. I really don't have any particular memory of why I did a lot of these things that may not make a great deal of sense. It happened so fast. I was reacting to whatever I was feeling, and I just know now I mean, the things that happened, but I wasn't I just wasn't going through my mind at the time whether I would need more or what exactly was happening.
So you went back into the house, correct?
Right.
And then what did you do when you went back inside?
I ran back in the room, which is about, I don't know, 20 feet or so, and I remember really don't have any really memory of the run. Just, I do remember having to reach over a coffee table and doing that as I was running and firing.
You reached over the coffee table, is that correct? And you did, and then what did you do when you reached over the coffee table? Would you show us what you did? Hold your hands like you were holding your hands.
I think over the coffee table like that, but I really don't remember that. I just remember that I had to reach over.
And you clearly remember that you had to reach over the coffee table to get the gun where?
To where I last remember that I saw my mother, and I'm not exactly sure that I remember that it was my mother at the time I saw it, but my mother, who was sort of, I thought, scrambling or going around that coffee table. And at that point, just no understanding of whether she was wounded at all or anything, just feeling threatened.
What scary or sneaky thing was your mother doing when you came back into the room and reached over the coffee table with the gun?
Nothing. In fact, I remember talking to my brother about it not too long afterwards, and saying that she wasn't moving.
So you knew at the time that you put that last round into her that she wasn't moving, correct?
I wasn't thinking
What were you afraid
whether
of?
she was moving or not. I just for some reason, remember saying to my brother that she was already dead, that she wasn't moving, maybe. And
Were you afraid your mother might live?
no, I was afraid that my mother was. I wasn't thinking anything in particular. I can think back, and I was afraid that I know that I didn't know that she was wounded in any way. and just that she was something that freaked me out about what she was doing, and I was in this, still reacting to what I was feeling when I ran in the room initially. And there was no time. It was only about 10, 15 seconds to get out and in, and it was just, I didn't think of anything in particular. So I can't really say well what it was at all.
Well, you were out of ammunition, weren't you?
Yes.
And your mother was still moving, wasn't she?
I didn't see her moving, but that's what I thought she was doing. It seemed like she was scrambling around the side of the coffee table.
You saw some movement on the side of the coffee table where you believed your mother had been, correct? Before you left the room to reload.
No, I didn't actually see movement, but she seemed to be in a moving position.
Did she cry out at all?
No,
Did your father cry out at all?
not that I remember.
So when you went back in, the television set was still on, right?
I'm going to Jeff Vegas to
I'm sorry.
find when we're
When you went, after you reloaded and you went back in, the television set was still on, correct?
Right.
And you could see the figures in the room, couldn't you?
Not well.
And you put your gun over there, and is it fair to say you didn't know what portion of your body the gun barrel was resting on?
Right. The room was filled with smoke, and you could not see well at all, and you could just barely see, and I knew that that was the area that had freaked me out, and I ran over to it.
Could you feel the gun hit something,
No, I don't have memory of that.
and then you pulled the trigger?
Yes.
Now, there was a telephone inside of the room, wasn't there?
I'm not sure.
Did your parents have a portable phone?
Yes.
And were you aware, may I approach please? That the portable phone was behind some cushions here in the curved part of the sectional couch.
I'm not aware that it was.
Do you remember the police talking to you about that on September the 17th in New Jersey?
They may have.
Okay, and if in fact there was a portable phone found behind the cushions on the sectional couch, you didn't hide it there, did you?
No.
And you weren't afraid that your parents would call for help once you started to fire at them, were you?
No.
After you and your brother disposed of your clothing and disposed of the weapons.
Well, let's take a recess.
Okay.
Area, and we'll resume at 10 minutes after the hour. Don't discuss the matter among yourselves or with anyone else. Don't form any final opinions about it, and we'll resume at 10 minutes after the hour. Jurors are back, and we'll now resume with the cross-examination.
Mr. Menendez, after you disposed of the clothing, I believe you indicated you also cleaned out your car at the same time. Is that correct?
Yes.
And what items did you take out of your car and get rid of at the same time that you changed your clothing? You and your brother changed your clothing.
The boxes of shells, anything I could find that, that there were wrappings and just little things still related to having bought the guns. And then the actual shells that we had picked up, the ones that I had.
Now,
Thanks.
all these items had been left inside of your brother's car from the time that you purchased the shotguns on the 18th until you disposed of them in the late at night on the 20th. Is that correct?
All the items except for the new shells that were bought and the ones that were picked up.
Now, during this period of time, between the time that you bought the shotguns and the time that you disposed of the items in your brother's car was parked in front of your family's home, correct?
I'm sorry, you confused me. Can you say that again?
Okay. I'm talking about the period of time between when you acquired the shotguns and when you disposed of the items behind the gas station, okay?
Right.
During that period of time when your brother was home and his car was there, it was parked in front of the house. Is that correct?
No.
Where was it parked?
At what point? Because
Well, was it ever parked in front during that period? That
sure.
approximately-
Yes. Usually he parked in front.
Yeah, that was his habit and his custom, is that correct?
I really can't say that that's necessarily his habit and his custom. I just know that I have seen it parked in the front, and I also have seen it parked in the back. It just depended if he was just coming to talk to me, like I believe Sunday when he was checking in, all he did was come in the back and park, talk to me, and then leave, so that my parents wouldn't know that he was even there. But I don't know if that would be a regular thing for him.
Now, you indicated that you were very concerned that you not do anything to cause your parents to become suspicious during this period of time.
Right.
The fact that your brother was gone all day on Sunday, did you think that might cause some suspicion?
I thought that, he would have to explain himself if he was asked, more than likely. But there were some things that, he was just too afraid to be in the house. And, some things you just couldn't avoid.
Now, I believe that we were speaking about the fact that your brother, during this period of time, parked his car sometimes in the front of the house. Is that correct, during the 48 hours?
During the 48 hours, yes, I think.
And that was the same area where
Yes. Sorry, yes.
that was the same area where your parents parked their cars. Is that correct?
Right.
Were you concerned about the fact that your parents might see these items inside of your brother's car?
No, we didn't have anything that was that obvious. My brother's car has tinted windows. It's a mess in the back. It's all kinds of clothes and items, and it's a hatchback. And that's where everything was. Yeah, I wasn't concerned that they were going to search through the car.
But you were very concerned that your parents were about to kill you. Is that correct?
Yes.
And you were very concerned that your parents were taking steps to prepare to kill you.
Yes.
And you didn't think that in preparing to kill you, your parents might snoop through your personal or your brother's personal effects. Is that correct?
Not in the car, right.
Okay. Did you hide the gun that you had inside of the guest house during this 48 hours?
Yes.
And where did you hide it when you didn't have it with you in the bed?
In the closet.
Did you take any steps to cover it within the closet?
Yes.
What did you do?
Just put it behind the things that were hanging. I had I believe it was a shelf, a mid-shelf. So I could put it behind the hanging clothes. Nothing, no great hiding place. I really didn't have a great deal of concern that somebody was going to go in there for the first time and look around, but I just put it there anyway.
I believe you indicated that the last thing that you did before proceeding to the Santa Monica Civic was go to the gas station and change clothes. Is that correct?
Right.
Aside from driving, that was the last other thing you did, correct?
Right.
And at that time, I believe you indicated that you changed your shoes and your brother changed an article of clothing. What was the article of clothing that you recall him changing?
I remember him changing his pants and his shoes, I believe, also. And those are the only things I specifically remembered, but he may very well have changed his shirt also. I don't know.
All right, but you specifically know that he changed his pants and you believe his shoes.
I remember that, yes.
Did you see any blood on his pants before he changed them at the gas station?
I didn't, but he said, I guess he was concerned with it. I don't even remember if he said anything, but I knew he was changing his pants for that reason.
When you went to the movie theater to try to buy the tickets, you were dressed in the same clothes that you'd been wearing when you killed your parents, correct?
Right.
Okay. Were you at all concerned about any spots that you might have had on your clothing when you went to purchase the tickets?
No, I didn't see anything that I even noticed.
Did you look?
I'm sure I probably looked, but I don't really remember looking. I didn't see anything unusual.
When you came back to the house, that was at approximately 11:45. Is that correct?
I'm sorry, when?
I'm sorry. After going to the Santa Monica Civic, you went back to the house and arrived there at approximately 11:45. Is that correct?
That could be correct, yeah.
The last phone call to Perry Berman was at approximately 11:15 p.m., and the phone records indicate that it lasted for a minute, correct?
Right.
All right. Then you proceeded back to the parking lot at the Santa Monica Civic, and you went home.
Right.
Did you stop anywhere on the way home?
No.
Did Did you go straight home?
No. No, we were intending to go to the restaurant, and when we started falling apart, I decided to just drive around and see if we could regain our composure and maybe still meet Perry at the restaurant, because I really wanted to do that. And just driving around, and at some point just realizing that it's just getting worse, and just might as well go home and call.
Well, how long did you drive around? How much time out of your journey did you take to drive around before you went home?
I'm not sure, 10 minutes, maybe 15 minutes, maybe 10 minutes, something like that.
Did you take any freeways that night? After you killed your parents, before you got home, did you take the freeway?
Yes, I think so. I have a memory of freeway. Like I said, for some reason I don't remember the streets so well, probably because I was driving, not driving too well, but I remember being on the freeway, either going there or coming back. I think I was on the 405 at some point.
You were on the 405.
I believe so.
Were you ever on the Santa Monica freeway?
It could have been the Santa Monica freeway, I really don't know, but it was a freeway.
And when you were on the freeway, in which direction were you traveling? Were you traveling towards Los Angeles? Were you traveling towards Malibu? Which way were you going?
I don't remember exactly.
Do you remember getting off the freeway?
Yes.
And do you remember what exit you used?
No. I really don't remember the streets so well.
And when you got home, you went straight back into the house, is that correct?
Yes.
And you parked the car, your brother's Escort, in the front there where your parents kept their cars, correct?
I believe so.
And you went inside the house, is that correct?
Yes.
And then what happened next?
Well, we went inside the house, and my brother went into the room where my parents were.
Did you go with him?
I went and got him and brought him out of the room because he was hysterical.
Was he making noise?
Yes.
What kind of noise was he making?
Basically screaming.
Same kind of noise that you can hear on the back of the 911 tape?
Similar, not that bad, I don't think, at that point.
You mean the noise that he was making before you made the 911 call was not as loud as while you made the 911 call? Is that correct?
I really can't say for sure, but he did not seem as hysterical before as he did a few minutes later when I believe he went back in the room. That's what I assumed, why he was screaming again.
Now, did you tell your brother that you were going to call 911 after you retrieved him from the den? Did you tell him, I'm going to go call him?
I don't remember. I mean, he knew that's why we had gone to the house instead of meet Perry, but
Well,
I don't remember.
How did he know that's why you were going to the house? Had you discussed it?
Yes.
And you told him, we're going to go back to the house now and call the police?
Right, we discussed it when I told him, I really wanted to meet Perry, but I clearly couldn't, and we were a mess, so we should just call, and said fine.
Well, if you'd gone to meet Perry, you wouldn't have discovered your parents until after you'd been with Perry, is that correct?
Right.
And were you fairly confident that Perry was not going to come back with you to the house that night?
No, I expected that from the restaurant I could get Perry to come back to the house.
Well, Perry had indicated to you when you called him, hadn't he, that the next day was a work day for him and it was very late and he wanted to stay home, right?
Right.
And then when you called him back and said, meet me at the house, he said, no, I won't do that. I don't want to disturb your parents.
I believe so. I don't remember exactly, but that would not have been at all the first time that Perry and I had gone out somewhere and then he had come back to the house with me and just spent a few minutes hanging out and so on, saying goodbye at the house. Sometimes he would just change his mind and we would stay up late and watch a video or something. And this happened many times. So that's what I was hoping I would get him to do.
You were hoping that Mr. Berman would witness you discovering your parents' body, weren't you?
No. There was no concern for whether he witnessed it or not.
You didn't want him there to be an alibi witness for you?
No, there was no way for him to be an alibi witness for me. I had missed the Taste of L.A. thing that I had told him earlier in the day I would try to meet him at, and now I had tried to meet him at the restaurant. And, you know, even if I had met him and gone back, it would not have been an alibi thing. It was just for my own wanting to have him there.
But Perry could have witnessed your shock and surprise at discovering the bodies of your parents, correct?
That's not why I asked him to be there.
So you went back to the house and you went inside and your brother went in the den. Then you got your brother and you went someplace and called 911, correct?
Right.
Where did you go?
I went upstairs to my mom's bedroom, if I remember correctly.
And which line did you use, if you recall? The family line or your own line?
The way my mother had the phone system, I mean, it was very hard to tell. There were buttons you could push to get the different lines, and so I really don't remember exactly. One of them.
Where was your brother when you called 911?
Well, I believed he was in the room again.
Back in the den where your parents were.
Right.
Did you call Mark Heffernan?
No, at some point I think that my brother did.
Do you have any recollection of speaking to Mark Heffernan before the police arrived?
Not really, but it's possible.
Now, who is Mark Heffernan, and who was he to you at the time on August the 20th?
He's the person that, when I play tennis in LA, I play tennis with Mark Heffernan. He's my tennis coach and my brother's, but mostly mine.
He was mostly your tennis coach?
Primarily, I guess that's the way it started. He coached my brother also, but I sort of remember him as mostly my tennis coach at that time.
After you made the 911 call and you came out of the house, do you remember having contact with the police?
Yes.
And
After I got out of the house?
after
Yes.
you got out of the house,
Right.
the police brought you out to the sidewalk area, correct?
Well, they ordered us out of the house, and they wouldn't come anywhere near the house. They were too afraid to come near the house, and they were sort of set up in positions, and I remember seeing all these people and having to sort of run out of the house through the gate.
So it was your assumption that the police were afraid when you came out of the house, is that correct?
Well, that's what I was told when I asked what was going on.
So you didn't have any state of mind as to how the police felt when you came out of the house. You just came out of the house and you went to the area between the gate and the street. Is that correct?
Right.
Okay. And did you remember having any discussion with your brother while you were out there waiting for the police to go inside the house?
I didn't have any discussion. My brother was very hysterical and just crying and may have been screaming also. And then at some point was trying to get back in the house, I believe. But I just remember trying to comfort him, get him to relax and calm down. And I believe some of the officers helping me try and do that.
Sometime after that, you were taken to the Beverly Hills Police Department. Is that correct?
Right.
How did you feel about getting into a police car and going to the police department?
I didn't feel good about that.
Why not?
Just because I knew what had happened, and I didn't feel comfortable about going and having to tell them something different. Just didn't want to do it.
Did you have any discussion with your brother on the way to the police department?
Very short few words in the car because the guy was sitting in the front seat, but I was able to talk to him just a little bit.
And what did you talk to your brother about in the car on the way to the police station?
What he was going to do when he got there, because obviously we were going there to be interviewed, and whether he would stay with what we had decided to stay, or whether he was going to say what really happened. And if he was going to say what really happened, then I wanted to know in advance, because he was very hysterical and crying. And my feeling was, even though we had discussed kind of what we would say, he just might not be able to do it and would just say what really happened. And if that was all going to come out, then I wanted to know. So I asked him.
And what did he tell you?
Well, we discussed it, and we would try and have Eric interviewed first if possible. And when he came out, he would tell me if it was okay to talk to the guy or whatever it was. He would say something that would tell me it was okay to say what we had decided. Or he would say something that, he had just said what really happened, and then I would know at that point, and I would decide what to do, but I wouldn't go in and just, tell that story.
So as luck would have it, your brother was interviewed first, correct?
Right.
And then he came out and he made some comment to you, is that correct?
Yes, he did.
And what did he tell you?
Something like it's okay, you can talk to him, or something to that effect.
Now, then you went in and you spoke to Sergeant Edmonds, correct?
Right.
And at that time you knew that you could lie to Sergeant Edmonds and you wouldn't have been contradicted by your brother's previous interview, correct?
Right.
Now, referring to page 2 of the interview of August the 21st, starting at line 1. Do you recall being asked by Sergeant Edmonds where your brother's car was when you left that night to go to the movies?
Yes.
Do you remember telling him that your brother's car was parked in back?
Right.
Okay, was that true or was that a lie?
No, that was something we had decided to say.
Okay, why did you decide to say that?
Because I felt that I had run out of the house, obviously, with a gun in my hand, and we had left the house, and we figured that people could easily have seen us.
So you wanted Sergeant Edmonds to think that you and your brother had gone out the back, and that if any of your neighbors had seen people in the front, those would have been the real killers, right?
Well, not necessarily. I don't think I thought it through all the way to that, but basically that whoever they saw in the front was not us, and I wasn't sure if they were going to see anybody or not, but basically that's true, yes.
So at the time that you spoke to Sergeant Edmonds, at approximately 1:42 a.m., you had already decided to say that your brother's car had been in back when you left that evening,
Right.
so that in case anybody had witnessed you in the front of the house, you could divert attention and say, that was the killer, that wasn't us, we went out the back. Is that what you're trying to convey to him?
Right.
Now, you also told him at page 3, line 21, you also told him that the reason you went back to the house that night, at the time that you discovered your parents' bodies, was you went to pick up your brother's identification, some false identification that he had.
Right.
Okay, why did you tell that to Sergeant Edmonds?
Because at that point, we were in a state that we couldn't go meet Perry, obviously, and so we needed to have a reason why we didn't meet Perry. So that was the only thing that we could think of, was basically we just say we went to pick up an ID.
And that was for the purpose of having your brother be able to drink because he was underage in California, correct?
No, that was for the purpose of trying to now figure out if there was something that could be. Things just kept, we were just sort of trying to make this up as we went along, and then as things happened that we didn't expect, try to just think of something to say. So when I had no expectation I wouldn't be able to meet with Perry, and when this happened, I had to say something. So we decided to say that.
Well, when is it that you decided that you would tell the police that the reason you'd gone back to the house was to pick up some fake ID?
Once I had made the decision that we weren't getting worse and not better.
Well, was that after you disposed of the evidence or before you left the house that night?
No, right after I had decided that we should go to the house, and I'd just call 911 as opposed to meet with Perry.
And then during that discussion you said, and when we talk to the police, we'll tell them the reason we came back here was to get false ID so that when we met with Perry, we'd have it from my brother.
Right, exactly.
And you planned that all out, right, to tell him, Sergeant Edmonds?
It wasn't a big plan, but it was what we had decided to say, yes.
You also told him during that interview, page 3, line 11, that you had called Perry from the Civic Center from a pay phone. Do you remember telling him that?
Yes.
And why did you tell him that you had called Perry from the Civic Center? Was there a reason?
Well, I think he was taking me through the night and what I did, and I was explaining where I was. Said I went to the movies. After that, went to meet friend, Perry at the Civic Center, and missed him, and so called him and was supposed to meet him at a restaurant.
And at the time that you told this to Sergeant Edmonds, you knew that you had made a credit card call versus a cash call from the payphone at Santa Monica Civic, correct?
No, ma'am. I've used the credit card to make almost all the phone calls I've ever made in my life. I used Sprint cards and whatever cards my mother had, and I'm sure there's records to reflect that. And it was not something done on purpose.
Then in the interview, you discussed with Sergeant Edmonds reasons why this crime might have occurred, and we went over those earlier. But at that time, you told him that it would be your father, which would be the reason it would have happened, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Well, when was it you decided that you were going to tell Sergeant Edmonds that?
We didn't have any discussion about what we would tell him. I had no idea he would ask.
Well, did you just make this up as you went along then, this portion of the interview with Sergeant Edmonds?
Yes.
And you hadn't thought out beforehand what you would say in the event that you had to use the shotgun in self-defense. Is that correct?
Say that again.
Okay. When you bought the shotgun on Friday night, and you bought more ammunition on Saturday, you knew there was a possibility you'd have to use it, correct?
Yes.
And you knew that if you had to use it, that someone might die, correct?
Yes. But I wasn't really thinking that. I was sort of buying the shotgun to feel safer, and I don't think I took it as far as thinking, we'll use it, someone will die.
When you were a child, before you had talks with your father, you used to prepare notes for those talks, correct?
Right.
You used to prepare yourself for your tennis matches, correct?
Yes.
You would write down lists of things to do for your tennis matches, correct?
Whatever my dad wanted me to do, yes.
Okay. And you would also then write down things that you would tell your father when he'd call you to ask how you had done during tennis or a tennis match, correct?
I would prepare for conversations with my dad.
Are you telling me then that when you purchased the guns on Friday and the ammunition on Saturday, that you did not think through the consequences of what you would do in case you had to use the gun and the ammunition?
No, definitely not. I never thought about that, only trying to survive and hope it didn't happen and hope that it never happened.
And then at 1:42 a.m. on August the 21st, you told Sergeant Edmonds that the reason that your parents might have been killed is because of your father and his business association with seedy people, correct?
Yes, I believe so.
And that was spontaneous, is that correct?
Right.
May I have a moment, please? Near the end of the interview that you had with Sergeant Edmonds, you told him, page 11, lines 4 through 6, you told Sergeant Edmonds that your mother was the great tragedy in all of this. Remember saying that to Sergeant Edmonds?
I remember very little of what I said to Sergeant Edmonds, but I know from, hearing it again that I said that, yes.
Do you remember expressing the sentiment that I've just read to you, to Sergeant Edmonds, that your mother was the great tragedy, or something of that sentiment to Sergeant Edmonds?
Again, I don't remember it, but I'm sure I said it. It's on tape.
Why did you say that?
Because I was feeling bad and guilty about my mother dying.
Well, when you went outside to reload, did you feel your mother was a great tragedy?
When I went outside to reload, I was confused and just afraid. And I wasn't thinking that these were even my parents. I was just thinking that danger and just going through the motions of reacting to what was happening.
Do you remember also in that interview, page 13, starting at line 23, do you remember telling Sergeant Edmonds the following, that it doesn't seem like they heard anything because they were on the couch. And my dad was, and my brother, I don't my dad is usually pretty, and then there's an unclear word, it's either deaf or good. My dad is usually pretty something to hear something. Did you tell him that your father was pretty deaf or pretty good at hearing things?
I don't remember.
Well, was your father deaf when it came to hearing noises in the house?
He was, to my knowledge, had no hearing problems, but he was nowhere near as good as my mother as far as being aware of noises. So I probably said pretty deaf, probably. But I don't know.
And then you said to hear something, so when he gets up right away, and then it goes on, and so I was really surprised that he was sitting on the couch like that. And then there's some unintelligible, and it says, my mother was on the floor like she was trying to get away or something. I don't know. Do you remember telling Sergeant Edmonds that?
No, I don't remember, but I'm sure I was just telling him what I saw when I went in the room.
Your mother wasn't sneaking, was she? She was trying to get away from being shot to death.
I don't know. I really don't.
At the end of the interview with Sergeant Edmonds, he told you what the protocol was in terms of your returning to the house. Do you remember that part of the interview?
I don't remember the interview very well. I'm sure he did.
Well, he told you that one of the reasons he didn't want you to go in the house is so you wouldn't be traumatized. And the other reason he didn't want you to go in the house is to disturb evidence. Do you remember him telling you about disturbing evidence?
No.
But after you talked to Sergeant Edmonds, you went back to the house to recover items from your brother's car. Is that correct?
The next morning, not after I talked to him.
Well, you talked to him at about 1:42. I believe the conversation took approximately 20 minutes.
Right.
Correct? You went back to the house at 5:30 a.m. Is that correct?
Yeah, I went to my coach Mark's house. We slept there. I woke up actually I didn't sleep, but I was supposed to sleep there. And in the morning,
And who took you back?
I came back. I took a cab.
Who took you back to Mark's house?
Mark, I think.
And he drove you from the police station
Right.
in his own car back to his residence. Is that correct?
Yes, he did actually, because he came over with us.
And then you took a cab back to the house at about 5:30 a.m. Is that correct?
Yes.
Did you go alone?
I can't remember. I probably not. Probably Eric went with me, but I can't remember.
Mark was not with you. Is that
No,
correct?
he wasn't with me, no.
What was your intent in returning to the house by taxi at 5:30?
I just felt that I wanted to search the car because I was concerned about them. I just felt that if they got to search the car, then they would know we were involved, and that I was afraid that that was going to happen.
When you went back at 5:30, were you able to search the car?
Yes.
Now, prior
No, actually, I was not able to search the car. I was told to leave and come back.
And who told you that?
Not sure who exactly.
Do you recall seeing Detective Zoller there at 5:30 a.m. when you went back the first time?
He was probably there, yeah. He probably was.
Well, is it probably or you recall it? If you don't recall it, just...
I recall that he was there either the first or the second time, but and I assume he was there all night, but I don't know if he's exactly the person I talked to or not. I really can't recall.
Then you returned at 8:30, and it was at that time that you were able to search the car and remove further evidence, correct?
Right.
When was it that you threw away the theater tickets that you'd purchased that had the wrong time on them?
I gave them to my brother.
So you don't know when they were discarded, is that correct?
No.
When you went back at 8:30, how did you get there?
When I went back at 8:30 in the morning?
Yes.
I believe I just waited. I'm not positive, but I think I just waited.
For 3 hours?
I think so. I'd taken a cab and the person left, and I don't believe they wouldn't let me use any of the cars or anything, so I think I just waited. I may have somehow gotten to Beverly Hills and stayed in the town for a little while and come back, but I don't remember it very well. No.
Do you remember telling Detective Zoller that you needed to get into the room, into the den, to get tennis equipment?
Yes.
Okay. Now, if you knew that there were items in the car, why did you want to get back into the den?
Because I didn't want to alert him to the fact that there were possibly items in the car. So I just asked if I could get something out of the house, and then hope that he would say okay or something, and I would eventually maybe get over to the car and be able to search the car. And that's what happened.
Okay, so you just killed your parents, you've been questioned by the police, there were police officers crawling all over the house, and you had the presence of mind to use a diversionary tactic like asking for your tennis equipment inside the house so that the detectives wouldn't be suspicious of your car. Is that correct?
Yes, and actually, at that point, called an attorney.
Now, when you returned to the car, did you search the car in the presence or where you could see other people around? In other words,
Well, the officer let me search the car.
And in the presence of a police officer, you searched the car and recovered evidence. Is that correct?
No, he wasn't standing there. He was sort of hanging out in the carport, and I just asked him. Now I remember, actually, the car was parked on this curb, the street, I believe. And I said, there's some things in the car I'd like to get out that I need. Can I just go through the car? And he said, sure, don't worry about it. Just go through the car. And so I spent quite a bit of time, actually, going through the car and taking things out of the car. And he wasn't concerned with that at all.
Weren't you scared to death?
At that point, I was sort of just searching through the car and hoping that I would be able to get, if there was something in the car, get something out of the car and get out of there, yes. Yeah, I couldn't sleep all night for lots of reasons, but one of them was just expecting to be arrested in the morning when they went through the car, which I had expected they would do.
And so you coolly walked back in there and searched the car with the police at least in your visual presence. Is that correct?
And nothing that happened those 2 days was coolly. It was just me very afraid that they were going to go into the car and trying to see if I could do something to prevent that and go there first.
Did you find any evidence inside the car during that search?
Yes.
What did you find?
I found wrapping, things that related to the purchase of the shotgun, like wrapping things and maybe even some papers related to it. I also found some shell casings that were just among the clothes in the back because it was really a mess. And I believe that's it.
And what did you do with those items when you removed them from your brother's car?
I put them in one of the tennis bags that was in the car, I believe, and I took them out. And at that point, I'm pretty sure my brother was there, and Mark may have been there in the morning also. He brought my brother over, and the attorney was there, and I just kept them in the bag, took them out, and probably put them in Mark's car, but I can't remember exactly.
Did you ultimately destroy the items which you had recovered from the car?
Well, I threw them away, yes.
Right. Shall we break for lunch, Your Honor?
All right, it's a little after noon. Or depending on your timepiece, it's almost noon. We'll recess until 1:45. Ladies and gentlemen, don't discuss the matter with anyone. Don't form any final opinions about it, and we'll resume at 1:45.
After your parents' death, when was it that you first became aware that wills had been located for your parents?
Within a day or a day or two.
Who located those wills, if you know?
I don't know. I believe was found in the house.
Was it done by someone other than yourself?
Yes.
And that would have been by the Tuesday, the 22nd of August, that these wills were located?
I believe so, yes.
Do you have any recollection of who located them?
No, I know at some point Carlos Baralt, who was the executor, had them. I thought they actually came from New Jersey because it was an old will, and then I learned later, I'm not sure at what point, that they were found actually in the house. So I really didn't really know.
Did you make any attempt to locate your parents' wills after they died?
No.
Did you ever go anywhere or do anything to try to locate their wills?
No, I went with the relatives and Carlos when he went to the bank to go into the safety deposit box, and he was looking for a new will because we all believed that there was a new will. But the old will, he had already had that, but he was looking for a new will, I believe.
All right, so it's your best recollection that your uncle Carlos Peralt was already in possession of the older wills
Right.
when you went to the bank to look for a subsequent or later will. Is that correct?
Right.
And do you remember about when it was that you went to the bank looking for the other will?
Could be Wednesday or Thursday or something later in the week.
Was it the same day that you went shopping, or was it a different day?
I don't remember. It was either that day or the day after, I believe. Carlos, I don't think, got there till late Monday or early Tuesday, maybe late Monday. And at some point he found the old will, and then at some point he went to the bank. So I would think it's like Wednesday or Thursday.
And you accompanied him to the bank?
Yes.
And were you able to gain access to your parents' safety deposit box at the bank?
Yes.
And how was that done?
I believe Carlos just said he was the executor, that my parents were no longer alive, and that they should open the safety deposit box. Not to take anything out, but just to do an accounting of what's in there, and also to see if there was a new will.
Was there any delay in gaining access to the safety deposit box?
I don't believe so. I mean, they had to drill it open. Obviously, they didn't have the key, I believe. There might have been a short delay, but not to the point where we left the bank. I don't think there was a delay. I don't think they had a problem with it. I think there was some discussion because they weren't going to let us take anything. They would drill it open, and basically the agreement was could go in and look and see what was there and make an accounting of it, but nothing could be taken unless he had court permission. So there might have been a small delay for that.
And were you present when the box was in fact drilled open?
Not actually there when it was drilled open, but I was there for the whole thing and rode back with everybody when it was over.
Did you become aware of the contents of the safety deposit box after it was opened?
Yes.
And were there any wills inside?
No.
Was there anything else inside of the box?
Yes, there were personal papers of my parents, jewelry, several items of jewelry.
Now, I believe you testified on cross-examination that at some point you had possession of some of your mother's jewelry and some of the personal papers. Is that correct?
Yes.
Were any of the items that you just previously described, either yesterday or the day before, were any of those items things that were eventually taken from the safety deposit box?
The ones that I took from the house originally? No, I took them from the house.
The items in the safety deposit box, the personal papers and the jewelry, what became of those things?
I'm not sure. I assume that Carlos has them.
Did you ever get any?
I'm not sure that they were. He may actually have taken everything out before I was arrested, but I'm not really even sure of that.
So you never had possession of any of these personal papers or the jewelry from the safety deposit box, is that correct?
Right.
Now, on Thursday, when you bought the Rolex watches, did you use any form of identification to give to the woman who completed the transaction?
Yeah, I gave my New Jersey license, I believe. I really don't remember that. I mean, she says that I heard her testify, and she said that she asked me for ID. My recollection is that she did not ask me, and I normally don't give ID when I use my dad's credit card. it's just a gold American Express, and I'm usually not asked for ID. They just authorize it, and the number comes up, and I purchase whatever. But if I did, I would have just given her my New Jersey license.
Now, is there a reason you didn't use your father's American Express card to buy yourself a Rolex watch before he died?
No?
And there was no reason at all that you waited until after he died to use his card to buy this purchase? Is that correct?
There's no reason, no.
On Friday, August the 25th, there was a memorial service for your parents at the Screen Actors Guild, correct?
Right.
And at that, was it you or your brother who spoke?
My brother, basically, I spoke because I believe I introduced my uncles. I may have spoke very briefly, but I was not one of the people that was to address the group, so I was just in the background.
And it was during that service that your brother spoke about your parents, is that correct?
I believe he spoke basically about my dad's involvement with the company and his dreams and things about the company, since that was what that memorial service was for my dad's business associates, primarily. Friends in LA too, I guess.
When did you go back to New Jersey after that memorial service, sir?
That was a Friday. I think I went that night.
And then on Monday, August the 28th, there was a funeral for your parents, is that correct?
Right.
Now, you had your parents cremated, is that correct?
Yes.
Was there a reason that you cremated your parents' remains?
Yes.
And why was that?
If I remember correctly, believe my brother had said that my mother had said she wanted to be cremated at some point in her life. She had made that statement, so we made that decision.
All right, so the decision to cremate your parents was because of your mother's wishes and not because of your wishes, is that correct?
Right.
And you weren't trying to hide anything by having your parents cremated, is that correct?
No.
Okay. And on Monday at the funeral, you spoke, correct?
At Monday, yes.
And you gave a speech about your parents, correct?
Right.
And what did you say about your parents?
I talked about
I'm going to object at this point as hearsay.
Overruled.
I talked about my dad's dreams for success, his complete loyalty to the family success and the generations, and how he wanted that to carry on, and how my brother and I would try to live up to what he wanted for us. I talked about I talked a little about my mother. Would have wanted the people that were in the audience who were friends of my parents. He would have wanted them to put their best face forward and put this behind them, and not grieve for her and let that interfere with her life, and just her philosophy with regard to that, and that's probably what she would say to them. I said some other things about my dad's achievements.
Did you prepare for this speech?
No, I remember feeling that I remember being up most of the night, feeling that I should have something for sure in mind to say, and wanting to prepare. And I was with Jamie, my ex-girlfriend, I believe, and also some other friends, and upset that I had nothing prepared. And I believe she was trying to tell me, that's okay. You just get up there and say what, you think that they would want you to say to their friends. So that's what I did.
In light of the fact that you had killed your parents, did you find it awkward to give this speech on Monday?
Yes, very.
Why didn't you decline to do so?
Because I felt that my dad would want me to do that, and he would have been proud of me to get up there and do it, even though I didn't want to.
You thought your father would be proud of you even though you are the one that killed him?
Yes.
Between Monday, the 28th, and Thursday, August the 31st, when you went to Los Angeles, I believe you indicated that there was a family meeting about accessing the computer. Is that correct?
Say that again, a family meeting about accessing. They had already tried to access the computer, and then I heard the discussion afterwards about
Right.
what they had found and what they would do.
Do you remember when it was that I believe it was your father's cousin, Carlos Menendez, tried to get into your mother's computer to see if there was another will? Do you remember what day that was?
I'm not sure what day that was.
But it was in Los Angeles, correct?
Right,
Because that's where her computer was.
correct.
Okay, and then once you got back to New Jersey and after the memorial service, you became aware of the fact that someone in your family named Eileen had made arrangements for an expert to come and look at your mother's computer in Los Angeles, correct?
Well, I may have known that from the discussions we had in California already. That may have already been the arrangement, but I'm not sure. It could have been in New Jersey.
But you also learned when you were in New Jersey that your father's cousin, Carlos Menendez, had made his own arrangements to go to the family computer. Is that correct?
Right,
And I believe you indicated that that made you suspicious.
yes.
Did you know what kind of company your father's cousin worked for?
Yes.
What kind of company was
I
it?
believe he worked for Merck,
And what kind of company is that?
pharmaceutical company.
And the fact that Carlos Menendez had made these arrangements made you suspicious. Why?
He just from what I knew of Carlos Menendez and just him being similar type of businessman to my father, and I felt to a much lesser degree, but still this is really, I don't like to say bad things about him because I really don't know, but I felt like he might be a shady type of businessman also, like my dad. That my dad and him were sort of competitors in that regard, and I knew my dad didn't trust him from things he would say about Carlos Menendez, and I just was very suspicious about why he would not keep the original arrangement. Eileen was incredibly upset about it, and he seemed to be sort of sneaking through my brother to do it, and just made me very suspicious as to what he wanted to do with this computer.
Now, Eileen was a relative of yours on which side of your family, your mother's or your father's?
My father's.
And so you decided to come to Los Angeles on the day before your father's cousin had made arrangements to access the computer, correct?
Right.
How was it you knew that September the 1st was the date that Carlos Menendez had made arrangements to access the computer?
Because I spoke with my brother, who knew all about it.
And so your brother gave you this information?
Right.
And that was sometime before Thursday, the 31st of August?
Right.
Now, was it your understanding that your brother was going to be present when Carlos Menendez's computer expert came to access the computer?
Yes.
And was it your understanding that Carlos Menendez was or was not going to be present? What was your
No, he wasn't going to be present.
So in spite of the fact that Carlos Menendez was not going to be present on September the 1st, you still thought that he was up to something fishy. Is that correct?
Yes.
And what did you think his computer expert would do?
I didn't know what to think. I couldn't think of any reason why he would hurt Eileen's feelings in that way and disregard her and sort of try to sneak an expert of his own in. And I didn't know who this guy was. Is he a legitimate expert or what? I knew that my brother was just sort of accepting whatever Carlos said about it, Carlos Menendez. And it just seemed this didn't seem proper for a cousin of my dad's to hire his own person, or if it was a friend of his or whoever it was, to go into my house, to my mother's computer, without contacting the executor and getting permission, when all these elaborate arrangements had been made with Eileen and her friend at IBM, especially with regards to information on my mother's computer. It just seemed very unusual.
All right, so before you left for Los Angeles on August the 31st, you contacted the executor to tell him what you were going to do, correct?
No, what I wanted to do was go there, see what was on the computer, and then basically erase the computer and leave it in a way, hopefully, that nobody would know that I had been there, and then see what Carlos was going to do.
Why didn't you just go on September the 1st and see what Carlos was going to do?
Because if I would have been there, then I don't think anything would have happened. I wanted to see if he had planned something with my, my brother wouldn't have known about it, but with this guy that was coming over. I was just very suspicious of what he was up to. Not necessarily that he would create a new will, but I didn't know whether he would create a new will or letters or what you could, he could do anything on a computer. So I just wanted to find out.
So you thought if you went on the 1st that it might prevent Carlos from going forward with whatever plan he had, but if your brother was there, then he might go ahead. Is that what you're saying your state of mind was?
Yes. Basically, my brother was very unstable at this time, I think impressionable, and I think it was taking advantage of my little brother not asking me, or at least the executor, to go into the house without permission and do that.
So you were very concerned that one of your father's relatives might try to inherit something that he wasn't entitled to. I mean, that's the gist of what you're saying.
No, there was no way he could do that. That's why Carlos Baralt, the executor, had no concern for the whole affair, because nothing on a computer would be valid, he said. So he didn't even plan to be there when the expert that was originally hired was supposed to show up. But it was just a personal thing between Carlos Menendez and I thought that he might be trying to do something, and I just wasn't sure what it was. And afterwards, I told him that, and we discussed it, and he was angry with me, and I was angry with him, and we just, expressed that to each other and worked it out.
When you went to Los Angeles on August the 31st, you thought you had already been disinherited by your father, correct?
Right.
But you'd seen the wills that Carlos Baralt found either the Tuesday or Wednesday the week before, correct?
Right.
And you knew from those wills that you were going to inherit.
Right.
Because you knew from those wills that if both your mother and father were dead, you and your brother would get the estate. Right? Okay.
Right. But I knew by the time I went to go to the computer that there was no new will on the computer. And I knew that there was no new will, period.
How did you know that?
Because the executor had told me that he had had a conversation in the spring with my dad, in which my dad said to him that he was thinking of taking us. He wanted to do a new will, and he wanted asked Carlos if he wanted to be the executor, and Carlos said he would be the executor. And then he said he was thinking of taking us out of the will to Carlos, and Carlos said something to him about whether that was a good idea and this and that, and my dad decided not to do that and said he had already told us that we were out of the will, and he was just going to leave it that way, that he had told us anyway. So I knew this from Carlos, and once Carlos told me that, I figured there was no new will, he just hadn't made one.
When did you get this information from Carlos?
Sometime in that period, I believe.
All right, so you had information from your Uncle Carlos that your father that spring, the spring of 1989, had considered disinheriting you, correct? And he had
Right.
talked about that possibility with Carlos.
Right.
Okay, and your father was living in Los Angeles and Carlos was living in New Jersey.
Correct.
And you took it from that everything was okay and there was no new will. Is that correct?
No, not necessarily. I still felt that my dad go ahead and make a new will and take me out anyway.
Why was your father going to disinherit you in the spring of 1989? Do you know?
I believe it was because of the girlfriends and things of that sort. Apparently he had not made a decision to do that, but he told Carlos that he was thinking about it, he wasn't sure, but that he had told us that we were out.
And he had told you that himself, hadn't he?
Yeah.
Okay. But then, on Tuesday or Wednesday, the 22nd or 23rd of August, you found out that you were still in the will, at least the will that everybody thought was the valid will, correct?
Right.
And when you went to Los Angeles, you wanted to make sure that there was no new will that would disinherit you.
No, we knew that before we left Los Angeles because everybody had gone through the computer. And my aunts, Carlos Menendez and Carlos Brault, the executor, had been at the computer himself. And he said that the only thing that was in the computer were the 3 entries and that there was nothing in them. And that he had no real concern for the matter. And somebody suggested that Eileen should get an expert. And he just basically thought it was a waste of time because it's not valid, and he was not going to waste his time with it, so I wasn't concerned for that at all. This was just a personal thing between Carlos Menendez and I, and my aunt and uncle, who were the executors, stayed out of it completely. Even at the house when Eileen was upset, they didn't want to get involved. So it had nothing to do with estate matters and actual wills and stuff like that, or Carlos would have definitely involved himself. It was just something that I was suspicious of and was personal.
Did you know how an IBM computer worked on August the 31st of 1989?
No,
Did you know anything about him aside from how to turn it on?
not really.
All right, so did you have faith that that computer didn't somewhere in the dark reaches of its memory have a will? I mean, didn't you think that maybe there was still a will inside that computer that you couldn't get to and your relatives couldn't get to?
No, because there was a file called will, so we assumed that it would be under will. But I suppose there could have been something in there. But the other problem was that this was my mother's computer, and I had a hard time believing that my dad, who would have been the one that made the will, would have just had my mother work it on her computer, because my dad knew nothing about computers. And it just seemed to me if my dad was going to make a new will, he would hire a very good lawyer that knew how to do that and do it properly, and it would be quite complicated, not something just worked out on a computer. So I didn't find, and I think Carlos Brault felt the same way. It seems really unlikely.
But when you had coaches as a child, your father used to interfere because he thought he knew more than your coaches, right?
Right.
Okay, and so you thought that in matters of his personal wealth, he was just going to leave it in the hands of some expert attorney and not have any input. Is that what you're saying?
No, that's not what I'm saying at all. What I'm saying is that he knew nothing about computers. Everybody that knows him knows that. So there's no way that he could have been working on that computer. And I found it very hard to believe that he would have left it to my mother, who he felt to be somebody extremely unstable, to be working out his will and the complications of that. I assumed he would hire a lawyer, and I assumed that the new will would come forward from an attorney who said, I have this information, you know, the new will.
Now, when you made contact with Mr. Whitkin, you asked him to look for the will.
No, I didn't. I asked him to retrieve the information, if there was any, from those 3 files. He tried. He said there was nothing there. I asked him to check if there was anything else in the computer, personal information or otherwise, anything other than just, you know, computer stuff. And he did that. He said no, there was nothing in there but just computer, like file language stuff and programs and things of that sort. And so at that point I told him to erase it in a way that another person could not tell that anyone had been there, and just do that.
But you did ask him to look for a file called will, correct?
I told him the 3 entries that I wanted him to check for first.
And what was one of them will?
Yes.
So you did ask him to look for a will.
No, not a will. And I think when he was here testifying, he didn't, I think he said that I didn't ask him for a will. He thought it was William. So, I mean, I wasn't specifically saying, I'm looking for a will, can you find it? Is it anywhere in this computer? That wasn't what I was thinking. I knew that those 3 entries had been looked at. I wanted to check them again. There wasn't anything on them like Carlos Brault had said when he checked, and that's what the expert said. So I wanted to make sure there was nothing else in there that was personal before I erased it so that I could see what Carlos Menendez was going to do the next day.
Now, how is erasing the computer going to trap Carlos Menendez the next day?
Because if it could be erased in a way that he didn't know I was there and he would not have known that I had flown out, he would just assume the computer was in the state that it was in.
And how was that going to set a trap for him? All he had to do was write over the erasure. Why would you erase
Oh, no, the
it?
trap was that I would know that there was nothing on it.
Why didn't you just take the computer out of the house at that point?
Because I wanted to see what he was going to do.
Then why didn't you just wait there in the house the next day? Why did you fly back to New Jersey so fast?
Because I didn't want him to know that I had been there.
And what did you hope to accomplish from this?
Just to find out what Carlos Menendez was doing going into my mother's computer in the house without telling anybody.
So you flew out to Los Angeles for a one-day trip, not to get rid of a will which might have disinherited you, but to set a trap for Carlos Menendez. Is that what you're telling us?
Yes.
Now, at the end of that trip, did you talk to your brother on the 31st of August of 1989? Did you talk to your brother about what had transpired?
No.
Did you make any attempts to talk to your brother about what had transpired?
No, I had one of the guards write him a note. Either I wrote a note or I had one of the guards write a note, one or the other. But I left a message for him.
And so the only way that you communicated with your brother between August the 31st and September the 1st is by writing a note which you left with one of the Bel Air patrol guards, correct?
Yes.
And what did you write in the note?
Something to the effect that not to worry that I had been there, even though he didn't know I was in California. I had flown, so not to worry that I had been there, and to just go ahead with whatever Carlos was doing the next day, and not worry about anything that happened with the computer. Basically, I don't remember exactly, but something to that effect.
Now, how did you travel back to the airport? Do you recall?
I think that I hired a car to take me to the airport.
You hired a limousine?
Yes.
Do you remember the name of the company that you hired?
I don't remember.
Your Honor, I have here a document. I'd like to have it marked as Exhibit 251, I think.
252.
Thank you. Showing you what's been marked as Exhibit 252. Does this exhibit refresh your recollection as to the name of the limousine service that you hired to take you to the airport?
Yes, Music Express. I guess the same ones that my dad uses.
All right, and this indicates that you made arrangements to be picked up at, I think it's Methuselah's restaurant, and that you wanted to be taken to Los Angeles Airport. Is that correct?
Right.
Okay. And do you remember whether or not there was a telephone inside of the limousine?
I believe so.
Did you make any phone calls?
I think I did.
Now, did your parents have a safe inside of their house?
They may have had a safe in the house. Not one that, I think it was just a safe brought from like the other houses, not something installed in the wall or anything, but just sort of an empty safe, but I'm not sure. I think we did.
Did you make any inspection of that safe after your parents' deaths?
No, I don't remember the safe too well. I have a memory of a steel safe, but I can't remember it too well.
Now, when you went back to Princeton, or back to the New Jersey area on August the 31st, did you stay in that area for a continuous period of time, or were you traveling to other places?
Until August 31st?
No, from August the 31st, when you went back, back to the New Jersey area, having erased the computer,
Right.
did you stay in Princeton for a while, or did you go other places? Between then and September the 17th, when the police came and talked to you.
I don't really remember.
On September the 17th, do you recall that you had a conversation with the Beverly Hills Police Department at your Aunt Terry Beralt's home?
Yes.
And, may I have a moment, please? Do you remember during that interview being asked if your parents had a habit, I'm sorry, page 4, line 26. Do you remember being asked by Detective Zoller or his partner, Detective Lenahan, whether or not your parents had a habit of falling asleep in front of the television set?
Yes.
And do you remember telling him that sometimes they would and sometimes they wouldn't? It would depend on their state of tiredness.
Right.
You remember indicating that if your mother was tired, which you were sure that she was because of the fishing trip, that they might fall asleep. Do you remember telling him that?
Yeah, I may have.
And do you remember telling him, page 5, line 11, that they would usually hold each other on the couch and sort of lay there with the lights out?
I may have told him that.
Okay, was that something your parents did?
I don't know about hold each other on the couch so much, but they sat there at night sometimes until it got to a certain hour, and then they would move upstairs and finish watching TV or movies in their bedroom.
Now, at the time that your father closed the doors on August the 20th to the den, did he indicate that he was watching a movie?
I believe that he did. Sometimes I'm pretty sure that he did, but I don't have perfect memory of it. But he said that he was going to finish doing something before he would, he said, go upstairs and I'll be up after I finish a movie, but I'm not positive.
And do you remember also being asked by Detective Zoller or his partner, page 9, line 26, about the identification that your brother had gone back to the house to pick up, and Detective Zoller asked you, know what name the ID was in, and you said Eric would know that. Do you remember that colloquy with Detective Zoller or his partner?
I don't specifically remember it, but I'm sure I said it if it's in there.
All right, and at that time you were not going to tell Detective Zoller that the license that your brother had was in the name of Donovan Gaudreau, is that correct?
Right.
Do you remember also at page 11, line 21, counsel? Do you remember also telling the detectives that the lights were on in the house pretty much, that it was lit up? Do you remember telling him that?
Right, it was.
Now, I believe you indicated, though, that there was no light on in the den except for the light coming from the television, and that the room that you went into at the front of the house was also dark, correct?
I don't know if I indicated that.
But you indicated the hall, the foyer, the lights were on in the foyer, is that
The
correct?
lights were on in the foyer, and I don't remember if the lights were on in the little room. I didn't notice that it was dark necessarily, that I remember.
Did you turn on lights when you and your brother came back and called 911?
No.
All right, so whatever lighting was on in the house at the time that the police got there and searched was the same lighting that existed at the time of your parents' killings. Would that be fair to say?
Yes, unless possibly I turned on my parents' light to use the phone, but I don't remember doing that, so probably it was on.
I believe you indicated that you turned on the lights in the den in order to pick up the shotgun shells. Is that correct?
Yeah, I turned on the lights in the den, but that was not when we made the 911 call.
Right, but when you turned on the lights in the den, did you turn them off then after you had gotten the shotgun shells?
I don't remember. I don't believe so, but I don't remember.
All right. The television set was on during the entire time. Is that correct?
Right.
And in fact was still on when the police arrived at 11:47 that evening, correct?
Right.
Did you in any way increase the volume of the television set in order to obliterate the sounds of the shotguns?
No.
Now, in talking to Detective Zoller, you had a discussion with him at page 12 about that he asked you, or he said to you, that your aunt mentioned that you felt bad that you didn't go back and check your mother. Had you ever told your aunt, and I take it this is Aunt Terry, had you ever told her that you felt bad that you hadn't gone back to check your mother?
I don't think so, but I may have. I don't know what I was thinking when I made that statement, so.
And then Detective Zoller said to you at line 9, your mother was gone at that time, so if you have any concerns that you could have gone over and saved her by being there just 5 minutes earlier, then you know, and you said, yeah. Do you remember Detective Zoller telling you this?
Not specifically, no.
And so you have no recollection of ever talking to your Aunt Terry about the fact that you felt bad that you couldn't save your mother?
No.
Because
When I got there, she would have assumed that they had already died, so I don't know why I would say that, but
But you didn't feel bad about not saving your mother, did you?
well, that situation really didn't make sense because I just wasn't thinking that way. I mean, I knew what had happened, and it wasn't a situation where I was saving my mother. I was afraid of her, so I don't think I would have made that statement to at least to Aunt Terry.
Now, do you also remember telling Detective Zoller at page 14 that the maid normally had Saturdays and Sundays off, correct?
Right.
And at the time that you shot your parents, you were aware of the fact that the maid was not home, right?
Yes.
At page 15, counsel, in speaking to Detective Zoller on the 17th of September of 1989, he asked you if there had been any problems recently between you and your parents. And you said, not really. My mom and I had a sort of a fight the night before.
Right.
Okay, and you were asked what it was about, and you said because she'd locked the door, and I forgot a key and had to wake her up to open the door.
Right.
Okay. Now, when in the early part of August of 1989, do you remember that there was a woman there who was house sitting, and I believe you indicated that you talked to her about cooking? Do you remember that
Yes.
lady?
Yes.
Did she ever give you a key to the house during her stay house sitting?
She may have given me a key to the house, but the problem was, I mean, at times I carried a key with me if I could remember, but the problem was that my mother wanted all keys to the house, all the controllers to the gates, in the little, table drawer in the foyer, and she wanted everything back in there, and you couldn't just keep a key like on a key ring, and so what would happen is, and she rarely locked the doors, so then you just suddenly find yourself where you had not taken a key and the door locked, and that was what the argument was about between us.
But your mother didn't know that Mrs. DeVito had given you a key, did she?
I don't remember if she knew or not.
Okay, so when you talked to Detective Zoller, you told him that the fight that you'd had was about the fact that you'd had to wake your mother up because you'd forgotten your key.
Right.
And you didn't tell him anything else about any of the other fights you'd had during that week, right?
Right.
Now, at page 28, starting at line 11, Detective Zoller asked you the following question. Marzi said that, and let me break here and ask you, did you understand Marzi to be your father's secretary?
Your Honor,
Yes.
I would object to this question because multiple hearsay.
All right, wish to approach. All right.
Mr. Menendez, do you remember Detective Zoller asking you about a fight that you might have had with your mother, not on Saturday night, but on either Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday night before your parents' deaths?
Whether or not he asked me?
Well, do you remember the subject matter coming up in your discussions with Detective Zoller on September the 17th?
I'm not sure. I believe I remember telling him that my mother and I had a fight, but I don't really remember the conversation that well.
Okay, and you told him, page 29, no, I can't remember exactly what night we got in the fight, but whatever night we got in the fight, we talked to her in the morning. And later on, it says at line 22, it opened up into, I started talking about one of my girlfriends. Did you talk to your mother about any of your girlfriends during the week before Thursday night?
No, I didn't have a girlfriend.
Well, but you had girlfriends, correct?
Right.
And you had girlfriends that your parents didn't approve of, is that correct?
Right.
And after this conversation with Detective Zoller and his partner, he began to ask you about your various girlfriends. Do you remember that he asked you about your girlfriends?
I think so. I think he asked about Christy.
Okay, and do you
And
remember...
maybe Charmaine, too, I think.
Okay, and at page 30, line 5, do you remember in discussing your girlfriends, you said the following, no, I thought maybe I had gotten Christy pregnant. I thought for a minute or two, but like I didn't notify my parents till I found out it wasn't true. Do you remember telling Detective Zoller that?
Right.
Okay, now I believe you testified earlier that you told your father before you found out it wasn't true and that he had paid off your girlfriend.
No, ma'am, I didn't say that.
Well, wasn't it your testimony that it was your state of mind that your father had paid Christy so that she could have an abortion?
Right.
And it was your belief that Christy was pregnant and had aborted your child as a result of your father's interference.
Right.
And you told Detective Zoller that you didn't notify your parents until you found out it wasn't true. Not till you found out she was no longer pregnant, but till I found out it wasn't true.
Right. And I'm not sure if how much of the truth of what happened there I was relating, as far as whether I found out from my dad that it wasn't true because Christy denied it. But I wasn't going to tell Detective Zoller that I felt it was true or that it was true and reflect badly on Christy and on my dad and those things. I'm just, I was not there really voluntarily. They were at the house. They wanted to speak to me. I didn't feel I could just say no to their face, and I just would not have been revealing lots of personal information about me or my parents and of that nature. Not to him, anyway.
So even this detail you lied about to the police then, is that correct?
As far as that I knew that it wasn't true, yes.
Now, on October the 31st, when you were called to Dr. Oziel's office, you were at the house in Beverly Hills, is that correct, when you received the phone call?
Yes, I was at the house. Yeah.
And how long had you been in Los Angeles as of October the 31st?
I'm really not sure. I'm not sure.
Would it have been a matter of days or weeks, or do you have any idea?
I don't have any idea, really.
Now, when you arrived there on October the 31st, did you have to wait for a period of time in the waiting room before you went in to see Dr. Oziel?
No.
Did you go straight in?
No, I believe I went in and I pushed the button, and then he came out and brought me in.
Was there anyone else present in the waiting room when you went there that day?
There may have been. I believe that there may have been.
All right, can you describe this person for me?
I just think there was a lady there.
Do you have a specific recollection?
Not sure. Not sure if it was that day.
Could it have been the November 2nd that you saw this person there?
Possibly. I remember it being the first one, but it could be the second.
And I believe you indicated in your direct examination that you did not trust Dr. Oziel. Is that correct?
Right.
Okay. And you knew Dr. Oziel at that point. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And why didn't you trust Dr. Oziel?
From our...
Your Honor, I'm going to object at this point. May I go first?
All right.
Mr. Menendez, why didn't you trust Dr. Oziel?
From knowing him previously.
And what was it about his conduct with you that made you not, or what was it about him from knowing him previously that made you not trust him?
Just knowing his personality.
So it was your state of mind when you went there on October the 31st that you did not trust this man.
Right. Not that he would do the things that he has done, but that this was not a trustworthy person, and this was a person with big ego problem, and just my overall feeling about him from knowing him.
Okay, and it was your impression from your prior contact with him. How many prior contacts had you had with him in terms of hours?
Object to this under 1014, Your Honor.
I don't remember. I think many, but I don't know how many hours.
And when you went into the room that night, you felt then that he was someone you would not want to tell your secrets to. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And when you got there, you were very upset with your brother. Is that correct?
Yes.
And in getting upset with your brother, it was apparent, was it not, that you had participated in the killings of your parents, correct?
Yes, I think so.
And you made statements in the presence of Dr. Oziel which implicated you as a participant in your parents' killings.
No, I did not. Although it is true that it was obvious that I was upset with him, and so I was involved. I assumed he had confessed to him, so I'm sure he knew I was involved. But I wasn't, at least in that session, going to say anything until I knew what they had decided to do.
Until you knew what they had decided to do? Who's
Right.
they? Who's
My
they?
brother and Dr. Oziel had met before I got there, and it was my feeling that they may have decided that my brother and I should turn ourselves in to the police, that my brother had told him what was going on, and that was my concern when I got there, and I just wasn't sure until I heard what they was all about, that what I should do.
Okay, so your state of mind then was that your brother had confessed,
Right.
and that in confessing you were implicated, correct?
Right.
Because that would have been part of the confession, right?
Right.
Okay, and that Dr. Oziel now knew or suspected from your brother's statement that you had killed your parents.
Right.
And you did nothing when you went in there to get him to believe otherwise, right? In other words, you never said, it's not true, I didn't do it.
Right. No, I didn't say that, no.
And in fact, everything you said would lead a normal, rational person to believe that you had participated, correct?
Yes.
Now, why was it that you were going to give Dr. Oziel the impression that you participated in the killings of your parents if you didn't trust him?
It wasn't that I was trying to give him the impression. He already knew. My brother had told him, so that wasn't an issue. The issue was what were they going to do? Were they going to turn themselves in? If my brother had made the decision that I'm going to say what happened and turn myself in and see what happens, then I wasn't sure how I felt about that. I had just gotten the phone call, and I had just gone over, and I just wasn't sure. So I just didn't want to, he wanted to tell me everything my brother had said to him, and I didn't want to get into anything my brother had said to him until I had talked to my brother and I knew what they wanted to do.
So you didn't want your brother to have any further contact with this potential witness until you had met privately with your brother, correct?
Right, I wasn't necessarily thinking it out like that, but that's basically what I was thinking, yes. I'd like to talk to him first, and preferably if he would just leave right away with me, that would be nice too, but he had obviously gone to Dr. Oziel voluntarily.
Now, at the time that you went there, you were very concerned for your own well-being, correct? In other words, you thought that this might lead to your arrest ultimately, correct?
Yes. Right.
Were you at all concerned about your brother's well-being?
Very much so, because he was suicidal, and that's why he went there. And it's one of the reasons that I participated in the way that I did afterwards in these therapy sessions was partly for my brother. But I really didn't have a feeling that Dr. Oziel was terribly concerned about that. I think he just found the whole thing fascinating.
Well, I believe you indicated that Dr. Oziel told you on October the 31st that he found you personally menacing, correct?
He did, yeah.
All right, so when he testified to that, that actually happened, right? He actually said that to you.
Yes.
Okay, so he was telling the truth about that.
Right.
Okay. And when you went in there and found out that Dr. Oziel, a man you didn't trust, now had information which linked you to a crime that some might view as murder, correct?
Well, I don't think I was thinking about what people would think about it, only that I didn't want to have to explain what happened.
Well, the theory in the community up in the first few weeks of the offense, after the offense had occurred, was that this could have been an organized crime hit.
I'm going to object to the theory in the community, as you're saying.
Why don't you rephrase the question?
Were you aware that that was the way that the case had been described in the weeks following your parents' deaths.
Yes, very much so, yes.
You were very much aware of that.
Right.
And that would have been a murder, correct?
Objection, Your Honor, calls for legal conclusion.
Yes.
Right. And so when you went there that day and you saw Dr. Oziel, you didn't know what your brother had said to him, correct?
No.
And I take it you didn't want your brother to have any further conversation with Dr. Oziel until you had spoken with your brother, correct?
I would have preferred it that way. I assumed, again, that I couldn't just walk in and say, Eric, let's go. I mean, I assumed my brother went to him for some reason.
And you wanted to find out from your brother how much damage had been done by him talking to Dr. Oziel, correct?
Well, I wanted to find out first what if they had decided to do anything about this now, and also from Dr. Oziel, who was obviously the person in control, what he was going to do with it. And so I wanted to find that out. And then I certainly, before I said anything as far as details or got involved in anything, wanted to talk to my brother first so we could decide what we wanted to do.
Now, in expressing your dissatisfaction to your brother, it was during that time that Dr. Oziel said to you that he found you to be personally menacing. Is that correct?
Right.
And at some point your brother left the room, correct, and you continued on a bit with Dr. Oziel.
Well, just a couple of words as I was leaving to follow my brother, yes.
And did you say to him, good luck, Dr. Oziel?
I don't know that I ever said that, but assuming that I said that, it wouldn't have been there. I think that I said goodbye to him in front of the elevators. And, you know, I think I was saying goodbye to him there.
Now, I believe you testified on direct examination that Dr. Oziel explained the confidentiality laws to you. Is that correct?
Right.
And one of the things you say that he said to you is that if you threatened him, that there would be no confidentiality, right?
Right.
But you didn't trust him anyway, confidentiality or not, right?
I didn't trust him, but
Right.
I was
So
hoping he was right, but basically he was telling me that there was only confidentiality if he didn't feel threatened, and that he basically, it could have been immediately after that he said he was feeling threatened, and said that, I think, more than once.
So he did say to you that he was feeling threatened,
Yes.
and you continued to threaten him, didn't you?
I never threatened him. He said, and he never said that I threatened him. He just said that I seemed menacing to him, and that he felt threatened by that.
And so if, in fact, you said, good luck, Dr. Oziel, it was in a cheerful tone, correct?
I'm not sure why I would have said good luck. Maybe he's just making that up, along with the other things he made up, or maybe I actually said it, but it was certainly not in a threatening way. I would never have done that at that point. There was just no way. I mean, I went there, and he immediately explained confidentiality, and that the more threatened he felt, or if I made threats at him, it wasn't confidential information. So the last thing I was going to do was give him any impression that could lead to that, if I could help it.
Were you interested in Dr. Oziel not feeling threatened?
Yes, very much so.
All right, and so at that point you said, Dr. Oziel, I'm not a murderer. I killed my parents in self-defense.
No, I wasn't going to say that to him. I wasn't sure if my brother had already said that to him, but I just wasn't going to volunteer it myself for the reasons that I gave. I just wanted to meet with my brother first. And I didn't know if Dr. Oziel was just going to go straight to the police after the session. I thought he very well could, and I told him that he was telling me that he wouldn't, and that there was some confidentiality here. He wasn't sure. He said it was potential, but that regardless, he wasn't going to go to the police. And my feeling was, I don't really trust you. I'm not sure if you're going to go to the police or not. I mean,
The night of your parents' killings, you sent your brother in to talk to Sergeant Edmonds first to make sure that he could keep the story going, correct?
right.
Okay. And you wanted to know what your brother had said before you went in to talk to Sergeant Edmonds.
Right.
Okay. So when you saw Dr. Oziel on October the 31st, you wanted to know what your brother had said, correct, in order to decide what you would say to Dr. Oziel on any possible subsequent occasion, right?
Well, I told him I hadn't decided whether I would talk to him again ever. I just hadn't decided. I mean, I had never planned on having any more sessions of therapy with him from a long time ago. I had made that decision. Now, this was like the first time I was meeting him again, aside from the, right after my parents died. And I just wasn't sure.
When you went home that night, did your brother come back to the Beverly Hills house?
My brother left in the Jeep, and he went to the Beverly Hills house, and he was still standing around outside waiting for me when I got home.
What car were you driving at that time?
I was driving the Alfa Romeo.
And when you got home, did you and your brother have any conversation that night as to what he had told Dr. Oziel?
Yes.
What did your brother tell you?
He said that he had gone there because he was thinking of killing himself, and he was very depressed. We talked about why couldn't he tell me, and he said that I was so unstable. I was just making decisions. So I wanted to play tennis, I wanted to go to school, maybe I was going to be in business, and that he just felt like he couldn't talk to me, that we were not as close for some reason. He felt distant, and that he was thinking of killing himself, so he went to Dr. Oziel so that Oziel could tell him he was a good person, because he was feeling suicidal and very guilty and confused. So we talked about that for a while, and then I wanted to know what he had actually told him, and he said that he had basically just told him that he didn't know why it happened and given him some details. The only thing I remember he said is that he told him we had purchased guns, and that we were involved, that we did it, or something like that.
Did your brother tell you that he had told Dr. Oziel anything about what you did after the crime?
I think that he may have said that he told me all the details that he did tell him, that at least he told me details and said, this is what I've told him.
Okay.
One of them was the purchase of the guns, and there were a few other things. And I learned in the next session that he had told him that I had reloaded and shot my mother at some point. I'm not sure what else he had told him. I think the thing with the car.
Pardon me?
I think the going back into the car afterwards also.
To recover evidence?
Right.
And your brother told you that these are some of the details that he told Dr. Oziel when he spoke to him before you got there. Is that correct?
Right.
Did your brother tell you anything about telling Dr. Oziel about planning the crime?
No. He said that Dr. Oziel asked him why it happened and so on, and he just said that he didn't know why. And he told me he told him that because he didn't know what else to tell him, because he didn't want to explain to him what was going on between him and Dad and the whole reason that this happened.
Now, Mr. Menendez, after your parents' deaths, you lied to many people about what had happened, right?
Yes.
Okay. Why couldn't you just tell Dr. Oziel that you were in fear for your life from your parents and make up a lie as to why?
I guess we could have told him that, but I just assumed that if I told him that, we would have to discuss why, and I didn't want to discuss why.
But you could have lied about it. You lied about it for quite a while.
But I never told anybody that and made up a lie as to the reason why. I just never mentioned anything about being involved.
Well, what you actually told Dr. Oziel is that you planned to kill your parents, right?
No, we never mentioned anything around the crime at all. We just kind of talked about what was going on in the family, and essentially I didn't know what he wanted to talk about before I arrived the second time, and he told me what he wanted to talk about. And all my brother and I discussed was, that he had said he had told him he didn't know why, and that I felt relieved that he had said that, and that I didn't want to talk about anything that had happened with Dad and him, and to basically just not tell this guy all kinds of family, all the things that had happened, and let's just try and, our main concern is to get him to relax. This was after we decided to go back. First we decided whether or not we should even go back. But since he was feeling threatened and he said there was no confidentiality, and I told my brother I really think he's going to go to the police, so let's see if we can get him to relax and feel comfortable.
And one of the things that would have made him relax and feel comfortable was the notion that you had killed in self-defense and not in any kind of premeditated way, right?
Objection, Your Honor, that calls for speculation.
I think that would have made him feel a lot more comfortable. And it's possible that my brother even suggested that, but I'm not positive. But I was very adamant that I did not want to discuss the reasons why this happened. I did not want to tell anybody, especially somebody like this, my father's problems to that extent and the family's problems and all about my mother, and I just was not going to get into those things. I'm a very personal person.
Well, you didn't know what Dr. Oziel knew about your family on October the 31st, right?
Well, no. I had a good sense he knew very little, but, just met my dad once, I think, and maybe my mom a few times.
Did your brother ever tell you that he had told Dr. Oziel that he had procured false identification in order to purchase the shotguns?
I don't remember if he did or not. He may have.
Did your brother ever tell you that the reason that he told Dr. Oziel the reason that that your mother was killed is because she would be a witness and she was miserable anyway? Did he ever tell you that?
No, obviously he wouldn't have told him that, but I really don't remember exactly. The sense I got from the conversation is that he had told him basically no details, nothing that could, nothing personal, nothing about the issues in the family and the problems and the crisis itself, and that was basically all I was concerned about. And I said, okay, we'll just go in and see what he wants.
Your Honor, may we approach, please?
All right. We'll be taking our recess in a moment. Before I let you folks go, regarding tomorrow's schedule, we'll want both juries here tomorrow at 9 o'clock. One of the jurors on one of the juries has a dental appointment that can't be postponed, and that's scheduled for tomorrow afternoon. And what we'll do in order to accommodate that is that we'll only be in session tomorrow morning as far as the juries are concerned. Tomorrow afternoon, the lawyers and I will use some of the time to deal with some issues that have to be resolved, and rather than keep you here, we'll do that tomorrow afternoon. So tomorrow we'll just be in session with both juries in the morning until around noontime. So I'll excuse you now and ask that you all return tomorrow at 9. Don't discuss this case among yourselves with anyone else. Don't form any final opinions about it. We'll see you all back here tomorrow at 9. And then I'll be discussing something with counsel after we close the courtroom. Your cross-examination.
Thank you. Mr. Menendez, when the police left your parents' home on August the 21st in the early morning hours of 1989, sometime that morning they turned the house back over to you and your brother, is that correct?
Right.
And between that time and one incident in December when they took your mother's computer, they didn't come back and take any other of your parents or your possessions, is that correct?
I don't know.
Well, were you aware that they had come back and taken anything out of the house?
Sustained. The answer is stricken.
Okay. So, to your knowledge, the only time that you were aware that the police were at your parents' house was after you had called them there during the 911 call, and they stayed there until about 8:30 in the morning on the 21st, correct?
Not exactly sure what time. I thought it was a little later than that, but that could be correct.
Would it be before noon on the 21st?
I think so, yes.
And did it appear that they had taken very little of your parents or your personal possessions with them?
Yeah, I didn't notice that anything was missing. I'm not sure that I checked, or I'm not even sure that I went in the house and stayed in the house long either, but I didn't notice anything was missing. Right.
In the days following your parents' deaths, you stayed off and on, or you went off and on to the Beverly Hills house, correct?
Yes,
And who wa-
very rarely, but occasionally.
Okay, who was involved in packing up the house and taking your parents' personal effects away?
My Aunt Terry. I don't remember who else, really. I mean, they had professional movers to take some things that they shipped to New Jersey, but and boxes and other things of that sort, but I'm not sure who was in charge. I assume it would be my Aunt Terry, since she's the executor, and I'm sure my Uncle Carlos, who's the executor, also was working, so she was probably there.
I believe you indicated at some point that you gathered up some of your mother's personal papers. Is that correct?
Yes,
Did you-
anything with her handwriting that I could see.
Anything with her handwriting that you could see?
Right.
Did you do that in regards to any of your father's personal papers?
No.
And so after the police left your house sometime before noon on August 21st, you were free to go through the house and do whatever you wanted, correct? There was no one there to stop you.
Right.
Now, I believe you indicated that in the spring or summer of 1989, your father had told you that he had disinherited you. And I believe you indicated that he said it in such a way that you thought it had already occurred. Is that correct?
Right. It was earlier than the summer, for sure. Close to the first of the year or somewhere around there. But I don't remember exactly.
Okay.
But he indicated that, yes.
Prior to 1989, had your father ever told you that he had disinherited you?
No.
So it was sometime, you think, near the beginning of the year of 1989 that your father first mentioned that he had disinherited you, correct?
I believe so. I mean, I could be off by... It could be just before 1989, it could be just after, but for some reason I don't remember the actual conversation well enough. All I remember is him saying at some point that he had taken me out of the will, and that there was no explanation.
How many times did your father tell you that he had taken you out of the will?
Just in sarcastic remarks, just a few times.
And what was the last time he had said that to you before your parents' deaths?
I think a couple of months.
Do you remember the occasion or what the surrounding circumstances were the last time your father told you that you had been disinherited?
No, I remember an argument with my brother that he had in which he was threatening to cut off my brother at some point for something small. He was just in a bad mood. He made some comment about that he spent all this money on my brother's tennis lessons, and he was furious that my brother was not answering the questions properly, not giving him the information he wanted, something to that effect. And he made a comment that he was already out of the will, and if he kept it up, he was going to cut him off completely. But that wasn't directed to me.
But you overheard the conversation.
I was there.
So then it was your state of mind that both you and your brother were out of the will. Is that correct?
Right.
And then sometime within a few days after your parents' deaths, you became aware of the fact that the only will that anyone had found included you and your brother, correct?
Right.
Now, I believe you indicated yesterday and also in your direct examination that you did not trust Dr. Oziel because you thought he had, I think you said ego problems or a big ego or something like that.
Yes, based on the way that he handled the situation with Jamie, that's how I got that opinion.
When you say, what situation with Jamie are you talking about?
A session which I was having some problems with my girlfriend, Jamie, and I was really wanting to work them out, and so I asked if she would come with me to a session with him to work on it, and she did. So we had this session, and he was trying to help me, and I had talked to him about what I wanted to take place in the session and get her to talk about her feelings and so on. And then after she left, his reactions afterwards and what he was telling me just gave me this feeling that he thought he knew it all and very two-faced.
When was it that you had the session with Dr. Oziel and your girlfriend Jamie?
I think like November of '88, I believe. Could be wrong about that, but I'm pretty sure.
All right, and at that time then you were in California, correct?
Yes.
And Jamie was in California?
It was one of the times she was here. She was traveling, but she was here at the time.
Right, and when she was traveling but was here in town, where did she stay?
She stayed with me in the guest house.
All right, and your parents permitted that, correct?
Yes.
And so it was because of that encounter with Dr. Oziel in November of '88 that you decided you didn't trust him because you thought he knew it all. Is that correct?
Right.
Right. Now, were there any other things that you had, any other experiences you'd had with him where you felt that you shouldn't trust him?
Not until after the 31st.
Now, I believe we were talking yesterday before the break about the fact that you and your brother had a conversation after you left Dr. Oziel's office on October the 31st, correct?
Right.
And during that time, you were concerned because you wanted to know what your brother had told Dr. Oziel, correct?
That was one of the reasons, yes.
And you wanted to know just how much your brother had told Dr. Oziel, correct?
Yes.
Well, you wanted to know if he merely said, I was involved, or if he'd given details of his involvement, correct?
Well, I wanted to know if he had given details as to what was going on as far as the arguments and the issues and the crisis and basically the things that would explain what happened. And he said that he had not. He had just said a few specifics of like buying the guns and a few things afterwards, but no details about the issues. So, and he had just said that he hadn't told him why, and Oziel seemed to accept that.
Now, why was it that you felt that if your brother had talked about sexual abuse, that that was something that you should get angry with your brother about?
Well, I was just, a lot of my anger was that I felt like he had gone to Dr. Oziel instead of going to me. And it was more that I was sort of hurt by that, and I was feeling like, why did he do that? If he's suicidal, how come I don't know, and how come he didn't, come to me? And feeling very caught completely off guard by the fact that he had now told somebody who I did not trust, and the whole thing was very upsetting and confusing and frightening.
So you were very angry because when you went to see Dr. Oziel, you thought your brother might have told Dr. Oziel about something that would mitigate the crime, correct?
No, I thought, there were lots of reasons, like I just said all the reasons, but that reason was basically that he had told him that we were involved at all. I really was not thinking that there were things that mitigated that. We were both feeling very bad about what happened, and just the only thing going through my mind is that we had killed our parents, and there was nothing that you could say about it that was good.
When Dr. Oziel explained to you the confidentiality laws and that things that you said to him would remain secret, you didn't trust him, did you? In other words, you didn't trust that he was going to abide by confidentiality,
No,
right?
I did not.
And no matter what he said to you, you didn't trust him, correct?
Well, I couldn't be, positive. He was saying he wasn't going to go to the police, and I just wasn't sure if he was genuine or not because I didn't trust him, but I really, what else could I do but hope that he didn't.
Now, by November the 2nd, you knew that the police hadn't come to arrest you, right?
Right.
All right. So, like the evening when you waited for the police to come on August the 20th of 1989, you waited a period of time and you determined that Dr. Oziel had not gone to the police, correct?
Right.
And so you went back on November the 2nd, correct?
Right.
And during that discussion on November the 2nd, it was then that you became aware that Dr. Oziel might be able to help you, correct?
No.
So there was no time during the session of November the 2nd when you felt that Dr. Oziel might be able to put together a family history to help you later on?
Now, he suggested that he could do that, and the only thing that I thought was good about that suggestion was that it would make him feel much more comfortable, make him feel needed, and less threatened. He was feeling threatened by the way that I acted in the first session, and this would certainly put us in a relationship where we would need him and we would be trying to figure this thing out together. So in that regard, I was very relieved when he suggested that and thought it was I said, that's a good idea. But never did I really think that was going to take place.
Now, when you and your brother went home after October the 31st, and you indicated he told you some of the details of what he had told Dr. Oziel, correct?
Right.
And your brother told you that he told Dr. Oziel about the purchase of the guns, correct?
I believe so, yes.
Did your brother mention to you that he told Dr. Oziel about seeing a show or a special on the BBC?
No.
He never mentioned BBC to you, is that correct?
Right.
And what other details did your brother relate to you that he had told to Dr. Oziel, aside from the ones you've mentioned?
No details as far as conversations or issues and things of that sort, which was my concern mostly, but the purchase of the guns, the going back to the car to search the car afterwards,
The reloading.
and that I had shot my mom last. And I'm not sure what else. There may have been one or two more things. I'm sure that maybe one or two more things about the aftermath, whatever happened afterwards. I'm not sure. Probably that we dropped the guns off on Mulholland, actually. I'm not sure what else. Oh, and sorry, I'm remembering. The going to the Civic Center, I think he mentioned that too.
All right, now since I asked you yesterday about it, do you recall at what point during your travels the night of August the 20th it was that you took the freeway? Was that going to the Civic Center or coming back from the Civic Center?
I think that I'm going to object this misstating the evidence. I think he said he didn't remember.
Well, this is the question overall.
I believe I took a freeway, and I could guess which way I took, but I wouldn't know for sure.
All right, so your answer is you don't know.
Right.
Now, when you were talking to Dr. Oziel on November the 2nd, did you ever say anything about the murder, about the crime being perfect?
No.
So when Dr. Oziel testified to that in front of the juries, then he was telling a lie. Is that your testimony?
That's right.
All right, and I believe you testified, though, that there were many things that Dr. Oziel testified to that actually were either said by you or said by him.
Right.
And one of the things that you repeated here yesterday was the fact that Dr. Oziel told you that he felt you were menacing.
Yes.
Okay. Did you by any chance talk to Dr. Oziel about your father's theory about the Chinese Revolution and how he would have handled it?
Yes.
So when Dr. Oziel said that here in court, and he talked about what you told him your father said, he was telling the truth, correct?
Right.
And that is information that you gave to Dr. Oziel, correct?
Yes, it is.
Did you tell Dr. Oziel about the computer and the will?
Yes.
All right, so when Dr. Oziel testified to that, he was telling the truth.
No.
Well,
He was distorting it a little, but we did have a conversation about the computer and about the will. But he was trying to connect the two and draw some points that I don't think were accurate.
but Dr. Oziel did repeat for the juries what you had told him, which was that it wasn't done for money, correct?
Right.
And that is your assertion, correct?
Right.
And so when Dr. Oziel said that information, which is helpful to you, he was telling the truth, right?
Well, I'm not sure that he said anything helpful to me, but he was telling the truth about that.
Well, I believe he indicated that, I believe he repeated to the juries that you didn't do it for the money, correct?
Yes, I think he did, yeah.
And you told the juries, I think within the first 3 questions of your direct testimony, that you didn't do this for money.
Right.
So Dr. Oziel's testimony then supports your testimony, correct? In that regard.
In that regard, yeah.
Object, that's argumentative.
Overall.
Did Dr. Oziel ever tell you during the November 2nd session that he was going to make tapes and put them someplace safe?
Yes.
And he did tell you?
No, he didn't say that. He said that he had made tapes and put them in safety deposit boxes, and there were other attorneys that knew about it.
All right, so that he did tell you, is that correct?
That's right.
All right, and did you ever tell Dr. Oziel that you felt like it was in your best interest for him to stay alive so that that information that he told you about would not become public?
Definitely, yes.
Did you make a joke to him about that?
Yes.
And what was the joke that you made to Dr. Oziel?
That I would, the way he had structured it with the tapes and so on, that I was concerned that he would, you know, if he ever died in any strange way, that now all this about whatever my brother had said would be released. And so that if a burglar, and I gave him a joke, that if a burglar ever went into his home and was going to kill him or threaten him, he might see me there, or I'd have to be there to kill the burglar and protect Dr. Oziel.
All right, so you actually did say that to him, is that correct?
Something to that effect, yeah.
And that sounds very familiar to you?
Yeah, it does.
Okay. Now, at the end of your November 2nd session, did you discuss the fact that you were going to go on a trip with Dr. Oziel?
No.
Did you
A trip with Dr. Oziel?
No, not with him. Did you discuss it with Dr. Oziel, the fact that you and your brother were going to go on a trip to Hawaii?
We may have, yes. We were planning on going on a trip, so we may have.
All right, so at that time you were planning to go with your brother on some sort of vacation to Hawaii or someplace like Hawaii?
Right.
Okay. Now, I believe you indicated on your direct examination that Dr. Oziel repeated something which you say is untrue, and Dr. Oziel said that your father told you, you can kill me if you want to, but you won't get anything. And I think you indicated that I would be in a hospital if I had intimated that I would kill or hurt him. Do you remember saying that?
Right, and so would anybody else, I would think.
All right, now on the night of August the 17th, the night that your father got home from the trip and you had the conversation with him, you indicated to the jury that you threatened him after you felt that your plan hadn't worked, correct?
Right.
And your father did not put you in the hospital when you threatened him, did he?
No, he was going to kill me instead.
Okay, but...
But I didn't threaten his life, and I certainly could never make a statement like that. We were having a discussion about some very serious issues, and we were going back and forth, and I was reacting to what he was saying. But, you know, from who my father is, and even from the little bit that Dr. Oziel probably knew about my dad, he knows when he makes that statement that it's just not possible, it's ridiculous. My father is not the type of person to give an answer like, well, you won't get the money if somebody says something that disrespectful to him. He just goes off. He does not react in that way. It's just not, it's not possible.
And yet when you told your father that you were going to expose him to the world as a child molester, he didn't put you in the hospital that night, did he?
No.
And in fact, he didn't put you in the hospital at all between the 17th and the 20th of August, correct?
No, he didn't.
Okay. Now, during the November 2nd session, did your brother ever mention the fact that your mother had been locking the door to her bedroom?
No, not in front of me.
All right, so is that something, well, was your mother locking the door to the bedroom during the period of time preceding her death?
No, but she did lock the door, so I don't know if he mentioned that.
Now, I believe you indicated, may I have a moment, please, Your Honor? I believe you indicated at one point during your discussion with Dr. Oziel that he gave you an example of two different kinds of killings, one of which was an emotional reaction to something like finding your spouse in bed with someone else or something like that. And then he described another kind of killing in which there was a great deal of, well, there was a lot less emotion, I think, would be. No?
No, he didn't say that, no.
Well, I'm paraphrasing it then. He described an emotional murder, and he described a murder that had to do with solving a problem. I think that's what you testified to on direct.
Yeah, similar. He basically described it as something where you know what the problem is. It's like an ongoing thing, and then what happened solved the problem. And mentioned something about that it was emotional, but that what happened solved the problem, and so there wasn't there anymore. Basically what he was saying.
And that particular description, the two descriptions that Dr. Oziel gave you, came after a question that you had asked of Dr. Oziel, didn't it?
No.
All right, so,
He was trying to, I'm sorry, go ahead.
well, so my question is this. Did Dr. Oziel mention the term sociopath to you right before he described these two kinds of killings?
No.
And so it's your testimony that at no time during the November 2nd session did Dr. Oziel use the term sociopath. Is that correct?
No, he wouldn't have said that.
He wouldn't have said that?
I don't think he would have been talking about, I mean, sociopath is a bad word, and this, we were trying to put things, we were talking about positive things in this session because, like you said, he was saying he could help us in a trial, and he was looking for mitigating factors, and he just wasn't, there wasn't any conversation about, bad characterizations of why this might have happened.
And you were trying to put the situation in a more positive light, correct?
Well, he was trying to help us figure out why. We were saying we didn't know why, and he was trying to explain to us, why he thought it would happen, and not in a bad way.
And so when he gave you a description of the two different types of killings,
Right.
how did that happen? Did he just say, by the way, I want to give you two different types of killings and let me see which one you think is accurate? Is that how it occurred?
Basically, he was fishing for the reasons why, and then he came up with these two examples, and he just kept trying to fish for why, because we were saying that we didn't know why, and he believed that we didn't know why, and it was kind of something that just developed, and he was trying to figure out. So he gave me this one example where it was just like all of a sudden the guy had no idea what was going on. He walked into this room, found his wife in bed. Or a situation where it was something that was ongoing, and there was a feeling that now whatever was there was over, was solved. And I felt that neither one was right, but it was more like the second, is what I said.
All right, so at no time did the term sociopath come up during this discussion, is that correct?
Right.
Okay. And Mr. Menendez, if you were trying to calm him down, and you were trying to help your brother, you were trying to find some sort of balance between what you knew and what Dr. Oziel knew, why didn't you just tell him, we did it in self-defense? Why didn't you tell him that?
Because I didn't want to tell him why.
What did you think he was going to do if he knew that you had done this in self-defense after years of abuse?
Cause for speculation.
I just I didn't think he would do anything. More than likely he would feel better. But at that point, I just felt, based on the discussion I had with my brother before we went into the session, that we would not talk about those very personal things in our life that are so difficult for Eric to talk about, and he didn't even know what would happen with me. I certainly wasn't going to talk about that. But even the other things, I'm not just talking about the stuff that happened with my dad, but even all my mother's problems, what she was really like. She was a very secretive person. That's the reason I collected anything in her handwriting, because she's a very private person. And I just didn't feel that this guy should have that information. Just didn't feel comfortable with it. It wasn't something that I wanted to just give him without any good reason.
But at that point, Dr. Oziel was the only person who knew that you and your brother had done it, correct?
Right.
He was the only person who could turn you into the police.
That's correct.
And you had an interest in making Dr. Oziel understand why you did this, so he wouldn't turn you into the police as a cold-blooded, threatening killer, but rather as a victim. Do you understand my question? You had an interest in making sure that you were portrayed in the best possible light to Dr. Oziel so that he would not feel threatened by you and turn you into the police, right?
Right. And I think at that point, by the time that he said that he could be helpful to us in a trial, which was very early on in the session, shortly after he made the joke about the Jeep thing, it was clear that he was not feeling threatened. He was in a much better mood. He was trying to piece together why this happened. He seemed fascinated. He was talking about maybe doing hypnosis with us later on. He was then talking about money matters at the end of the session. He was not afraid. I got a completely different sense from him, and I never got a sense after that he seemed threatened again, and he never told me he felt threatened again.
So during the November 2nd session, that's when Dr. Oziel talked about abuse as a defense. Is that correct? He talked about using abuse as a defense to the crime.
No, he didn't. He talked about helping in a trial, helping an attorney piece together what he called the family constellation, the dynamics in the family, that the emotions that might have led to this, in his opinion.
Dr. Oziel is the one who planted in your mind the idea of using abuse as a defense. Isn't that true?
No, ma'am.
Thank you. I have nothing further.
Your Honor, I'd like to mark 2 additional exhibits. One is a message on Princeton University paper, which I've already sent to the prosecution, dated February 1st, 1989, documenting a phone call from Lyle Menendez's father to the university regarding his room. What's the next number? 253?
Yes.
And the other are medical records from the Beverly Hills Medical Center dated January 22nd, 1989, documenting hospitalization for heart problems of Jose Menendez. May I approach?
Yes.
Mr. Menendez, you had indicated on direct that you had some difficulty with regard to your housing at Princeton University when you returned in 1989?
Yes.
And you had indicated that your father had intervened?
Yes.
Is that correct? I'm showing you what we've now marked as 253. Would you take a look at that?
Yes.
Can you tell me what it indicates?
I was in Wilson College at Princeton University, and this is a person that worked there, just that my father had made a call to get my room changed.
And is your father referred to as Lyle Menendez Sr. on there?
Yes.
Is that, in fact, his name? Was it his name?
No.
And I'm showing you what we've marked as 254. You indicated that that there was some discussion with regard to your father not being able to take a physical because of some heart problems he'd had in January. Is that correct?
Right.
Showing you 254. Ask you to identify what that is.
These are the records from the Beverly Hills Medical Center, I guess on January 22nd, 1989, about my dad's heart problem, chest pain, other problems.
Does it indicate on there the admitting diagnosis?
Acute chest pain, unstable angina.
And I'm showing you what has previously been marked as exhibit number 61. Mrs. Bazanich asked you about a letter that you wrote to Donovan Goudreau.
Yes.
Remember that?
Right.
And she asked you if that letter reflected that you were a caring person. You remember her question?
Right.
I'm showing you that. What we've marked as defendant 61, or exhibit 61. I ask if you recognize that letter.
Yes, I do.
And what is that letter?
This is the letter I wrote to Donovan.
And when did you write it to him?
It's June 18th, 1993.
You'd indicated before that in that letter you basically told him that you weren't upset with him, you knew he had to testify and that he shouldn't feel badly about it. Is that correct?
Right.
Mrs. Bazanich had asked you about the lifestyle that you had while your parents were alive. Do you remember that?
Right.
She asked you about private schools and tennis lessons and clothes and cars. Did you have all the material things that anybody could have wanted?
I think so.
Did you have everything that any kid could have wanted in your childhood?
I don't think so.
What didn't you have?
Just emotional things
Did have?
and
I'm sorry.
more time to play with friends and just other things other kids do.
Did having expensive schooling and tennis lessons make up for the way you were treated by your parents?
I didn't really think about balancing it out. I was just doing the best I could.
Did it, having all those material things make your childhood happy?
No.
You had been asked by Mrs. Bazanich with regard to your father's business affairs. Do you remember that?
Yes.
And she asked you some questions about how much he was making at the time that he died.
Right.
What was your understanding about what his future earning capacity was?
Well, my understanding was that he had another contract to be negotiated, I think that January. And as soon as he had settled on his second contract, the one in the spring, he came home and he was furious because he had thought he got basically screwed over and had asked for way too little, because they had said yes immediately and seemed thrilled with the fact that he only wanted what he wanted. So he was going to try and renegotiate right away and basically forget the other contract and do a new one and ask for many times what he did.
And did you think he was going to get it?
Yes.
Why?
Just what he was doing for the company. I mean, for one thing, the company was heavily in debt and losing money when he was brought in, and he was the only reason that it became this phenomenally profitable company. So the owners basically gave him whatever he wanted, because without him, there was no company, and with him, they made really a fortune. So, and all he was asking for was percentage of the stock and percentages of the profits that he was making. So he would only get what he made.
Did you think it was going to be much more than he was making at the time?
Well, he said he was going to ask for somewhere around the equivalent of $20 million. And he had asked for somewhere around what he thought was the equivalent of it, close to $8 million before. And so to me it was a big difference, and to him was a big difference. And then after that, I think he said he was going to stop and go back to Florida.
And you talked about the hospitalization, and you knew he hadn't taken the physical for the $5 million policy. Did you think he was going to take it in the future, or did you think he was never going to take it?
It seemed like he was about to take it any time. I mean, the appointments were being, he didn't say, don't make an appointment for me, I'll take it a couple of years from now. They kept making appointments for him, and he just was giving excuses. He was too busy, I'll catch it next week, that kind of thing. And but it was that he just wanted as much time to go by as he could, really, before, after his heart problem. But, you know, he had to take the physical so he could get the policy so they could pay the premiums. So he couldn't wait forever, but he wanted to wait as long as he could.
And this information is based on what he was telling you?
This is based on arguments between he and my mother.
you talked about being told that you had, you were out of the will. Your father had told you were out of the will. Is that correct?
Right.
Did your lifestyle change at all in terms of the money that was available to you on a daily basis after your dad told you that?
No.
So you still had tennis lessons after that?
Yeah, it was after that that he was going to buy the condominium, and actually things, the family seemed to have more money as the time went on. And I don't think that the will thing had anything to do with now. It was more a way of saying that he was concerned. To me, it was a way of him saying he was concerned about my girlfriends and that I needed to live up to what he wanted for me, and that included the right woman.
You told us that you were hoping on Friday that your dad wouldn't go to work. You had this conversation with him Thursday night in which you confronted him about what was happening with your brother. And I believe that on cross you said you were hoping your dad wouldn't go to work on Friday. Why was that?
Well, I was surprised and hoping because surprised that he did go, and hoping because we just had this huge day Thursday, this incredible problems and the threats back and forth, and this basically, to me, it was an issue that was going to change everybody's life one way or another, and was dangerous and so on, and it just seemed like I just was hoping that my dad was going to initiate a conversation with me in the morning and say, because we had had all this happen late the night before, like after 11, he was going to come in the morning and say, hey, I've thought it over, and you're right, or something of that nature. And he just sort of, I just heard that he had left for work. I didn't even see him go, but it was sort of disheartening.
You were asked about running away. You were asked a number of times about, why didn't you just leave then? Did you and your brother discuss running away at all during this time?
Yes, we mostly discussed it Thursday night, and we may have talked about it a few other times during the weekend. But basically Thursday night, emotionally, everything that was going on, my brother was very firm that he could not leave. And
when he explained his reasons why he couldn't go, did they make sense to you?
yes,
And whether they made sense or not, if your brother couldn't go, would you have left?
I would never have left without my brother. And I think probably there was a lot of reasons my brother felt he could not go. And I think, we have to remember my brother was he was suicidal at this point. This is why this had all started. He wanted to kill himself. It was hard to even, it took a while for him to get into wanting to survive. I got the sense that he was like, let them kill me. That was the sense I was getting. He wasn't saying that, but that's what I felt. So he wasn't going to leave. And, he did clearly want to survive and took steps to protect himself and regained the feeling of wanting to go on. But for that one night and the preceding day, the days before, I felt like he was unsure if he wanted to go on.
When he got a little bit stronger, did he then feel he could leave?
No, he was adamant that we couldn't leave for very good reasons, but I also thought that there was emotional reasons.
Mrs. Bazanich asked you about the state of your brother's car. You had the guns in the car and whether people could see the guns or the ammunition that you had in the car. What was the back of your brother's car like?
Just similar to his room, just except for there was, nobody to help him organize it. It was basically just his car, and so it was just clothes that would just pile up day after day. if he would go to a tournament, he would bring a change of clothes after he played or whatever. Everything would just stay in the car. And if he knew he was going to play tennis or do something and then he wanted to go out with some friends that night, he'd bring a change of clothes and, a whole different outfit and just leave it in the car. And then maybe he wouldn't go out. And then things would just pile up and pile up. And essentially, since it was a hatchback, it was just this ball of stuff that was sort of strewn over into the next seat also.
So,
But all the windows were tinted also, so I don't.
so there was room in the car to have hidden guns under the clothing? Is that what you're saying? You could put
Yeah, I don't
guns-
remember hiding them under the clothing, but certainly could have done that.
You think you had them just laying on top or of the clothing, or or do you remember where they were?
Well, we brought them into the house.
But when you were moving them from like San Diego?
Yeah, they were just in the back, and all the windows were dark, and I really didn't think about it.
You've talked about or you were asked about who cleaned out the Beverly Hills house. Right after your parents died, did a number of your relatives arrive in Los Angeles?
Yes.
And do all of your relatives live outside of do you have any relatives who live in California? I think you have your cousin Henry. Is that right?
Cousin Henry?
Do you have
Right.
any other relatives who live in California?
I don't believe so.
Or right around the Los Angeles area? Any others?
I don't think so. Not that I know of.
Okay. So did all of your other relatives come from either another part of the state or another state?
Right.
And were your relatives in the Beverly Hills house after your parents died?
Yeah, my Aunt Terry and my Aunt Joan went in immediately, and everybody was in there because at some point they were working on the computer.
Did your grandmother go in?
I'm sure she did. My grandmother
And
does
your-
whatever she wants, so I'm sure she went in.
And your aunts went in?
Oh, yeah, both my aunts went in.
Did your
Probably my Aunt Marta, too.
Did your uncles go in?
Yes.
And your cousin Carlos Menendez?
I believe so, yes.
And do you know if while these relatives were in the house, they took things, they took clothing that belonged to your mom or took other personal effects?
They did take clothing.
Were you there watching what people took, or did people just sort of help?
No, I heard later from my Aunt Terry that my Aunt Joan and several people were, for memory's sake, wanting certain things of my mother's, and she was having a discussion with me about what we should do about that and whether we should wait first, and so I knew that people had been there taking things. I don't know what, though.
And do you have any idea how many people were in the house during that period of time, or how long they were there, or were you somewhere else?
I basically stayed away from the house and stayed away from, nobody could go into the room where my parents had been, and I just felt very bad about the house, so I didn't go. That's why we stayed in the hotel. We couldn't stay at the house.
You talked about a series of events that happened starting on Tuesday and ending on Sunday night. You've talked about that here.
Yes.
And I think at one point you said that certain events happened that for you carried real significance. They were frightening to you, but they might not be frightening to somebody else. Do you
Right.
remember saying that?
Yes.
In your years of living in the same house with your parents, did you find that it was important to try to guess what was going to happen next ahead of time?
Objection, lady.
Did you sometimes have to make decisions or read signals?
All the time. I think probably other kids do the same thing, but for me, for sure, with regards to my parents, because of the way they were, just from my mom's facial expressions or her tone of voice or the way she moved, and my dad, for sure. My dad controlled people with hand signals, so, but it was more than that. You could read his face and just whatever he was doing. I mean, if he changed into tennis clothes right away, or if he stayed in his business suit, or if he went over and watched TV, or, you know, the atmosphere changed very significantly and very suddenly all the time. So I was constantly aware of that. But it's it's been very frustrating trying to describe what they were like and what it was like and why I felt the way I did that weekend. And I've felt frustrated through this whole thing, not being able to express that in a way that it is the same as it was.
Why would it be necessary for you to pick up cues in the atmosphere or read signals? Why would you want to do that? Why did you want to do that as a child?
Because there was not a lot of normal communication. It was a very unpredictable place, my home, and my mother especially. And, you know, my dad could be violent or even, you know, just I wanted his approval so bad that even just shaking his head sort of made my heart sink. So I was always on edge trying to figure out how I could avoid that.
Were you trying to read the signals this last week?
Yes.
And were you talking to your brother about what various things meant?
Yes.
And did he seem to be engaging in the same process of reading signals?
Yes.
And based on all of the things you learned about your parents in your life, in terms of their behavior, when you saw the things they were doing in that last week, did you believe that they were going to kill you?
We believed that they were.
Thank you. I have nothing further.
Any recross?
Mr. Menendez, what hand signal did your father give to you before you put the gun to the back of his head and pulled the trigger?
He didn't give me any.
And what signal was your mother giving you when she was sneaking away near the coffee table before you went out and reloaded?
Nothing. I was just afraid at that point.
Okay, thank you, Otto.
Were the signals you received signals that occurred before you went into that room?
Yes.
All right, let me see you with the sidebar here. All right, what we're going to do at this point is take a short recess and excuse the Eric Menendez jury until 11 o'clock and have the Lyle Menendez jury reassemble here in 5 minutes, and we'll resume with proceedings with the Lyle Menendez jury only, and then the Eric Menendez jury, if you would come back at 11 o'clock, and as soon as we're ready to proceed with you, then we'll do so. Again, don't discuss this case among yourselves or with anyone else, and don't form any final opinions about it. We'll see the Eric Menendez jury back here at 11, and the Lyle Menendez jury back here at 10:30.
Mr. Menendez, I believe I asked you this morning about whether or not your brother had related to you the fact of whether or not he told Dr. Oziel about a special or a show on the BBC. Is that correct?
Right.
Did a discussion or the name BBC ever come up during the November 2nd session that you had with
No.
Dr. Oziel? And when I talk about the BBC, do you know what I'm talking about?
I assume, yeah.
What am I talking about? What do you think I'm talking about?
Objection irrelevant.
Rephrase the question.
What is the BBC in your mind?
I'm going to object.
It's a
Overall.
What is it?
it's a broadcasting network.
Is that the British Broadcasting Corporation?
Right.
Are you familiar with another form of BBC, another name that those initials stand for?
I'm going to object to the grounds of relevancy.
Overall.
They're similar to my New Jersey family's New Jersey Country Club initials, BBC.
That would be the Badenbrook Country Club?
Beadensbrook.
Okay. What about the Billionaire Boys Club? Yeah, have you ever heard of that?
Yes, I've heard of that.
All right. And had you heard of the Billionaire Boys Club before you killed your parents on August the 20th of 1989?
I assume so. I think it's an old
Oh, no.
show, an old movie.
Okay. Were you aware of the fact that it was a movie based on something true?
Yes.
And as a matter of fact, what was your understanding before your parents' deaths as to what the truth was about the Billionaire Boys Club?
I'm going to object to the grounds of relevancy.
Why don't you create some time frame here before we get into this?
During the year preceding your parents' deaths, were you aware of an organization called the Billionaire Boys Club?
No.
And when did you first learn about the Billionaire Boys Club?
I didn't learn about it at all, just that there was a movie about the Billionaires Boys Club, which was supposed to be about something that happened in L.A.
And it was about 2 murders, is that correct? Was that your understanding of it?
I'm going to
Again, can we establish a time frame?
Okay, did you know about the movie, The Billionaire Boys Club, before you killed your parents?
Yes, I knew about it.
And how did you know about it?
I'm not sure how I know about it. Just a movie that I'm aware of.
Did you see the movie?
No.
And you never saw it on television or any other way, is that correct?
I may have seen it advertised on TV, or I may have somebody might have talked about it.
Okay, and who might have talked about the Billionaire Boys Club movie to you before your parents' deaths?
I really don't know. It seemed like a long time before.
Did your brother ever talk to you about the Billionaire Boys Club before your parents' deaths?
I don't know. Maybe.
Okay, in the movie, were you aware of the fact that a son participates in the killing of his father?
I'm aware of it now, but I'm not sure.
But you might have been aware of it before the killings of your parents, is that correct?
I may have.
And were you aware of the fact that in real life, the name of the person who was killed, the father who was killed, was Eslamenia? Did you know that?
No.
Okay.
No, but I knew that Hunt was one of the kids, I believe.
And Hunt was the main defendant, correct? You knew that? Joe Hunt.
Right. I didn't know that he was a defendant necessarily, but I knew that he was supposedly, the BBC thing had to do with Joe Hunt or something like that.
And how did you know about Joe Hunt before your parents' killings?
I didn't know. It was just from the knowing about the show.
Now, on June the 8th of 1990, some paperwork was taken from your jail cell at the county jail. Is that correct?
Right.
Your Honor, may I approach, please? I have an item I'd like to mark as next in order. I think that would be
255.
Mr. Menendez, I'm showing you a piece of paper. There's writing on both sides, but I'm going to show you the side that's got the number 255 on it. You've got some, it looks like organizational goals. Would that be fair to say that these are organizational goals for Mr. Stevens?
Yes.
Okay, so at the time that you prepared this, you trusted Glenn Stevens. Would that be fair to say?
I would say definitely, yeah.
Okay. And at one point in your life at police, you and Mr. Stevens were very close. Would that be fair to say?
I would not say very close. I would say he was one of my friends, and I didn't have many.
Right. Well, when you came out to California in March of 1990, you brought with you 2 people. Is that correct?
In March of 1990, right, Hayden and Glenn.
All right. And did you pay their way to come out here?
Yes.
Okay. And they were both friends of yours. Is that correct?
Right.
Now, did you ever tell Glenn something to the effect of if the police ever got their hands on some tapes that Dr. Oziel had, that you would be in bad shape?
No.
I'm paraphrasing.
Right, no, I remember what he said, and that's not true.
Okay, so you never said that to him?
No.
And you never gave him any money? Did you ever give him any money for the purpose of perhaps making bail or something like that?
Not, I may have given him money when we got arrested and just given whatever money I had on me to him. And I remember that, I gave him so much money that it's really hard to know, but I never gave him money specifically for bail because I never had a bail.
Did you ever give him your attorney's card or give him the name of your attorney in March of 1990?
Before I was arrested?
Yes.
I don't think so.
Shortly after your arrest, did you ask Glenn Stevens, through your girlfriend, to get something out of your Porsche?
Yes, I did.
Okay, and why don't you tell us what you asked for?
Well, I knew that there were just things with my mother's handwriting on them in my car, and I didn't know what was going to happen with my car. And so I just didn't want someone, stranger to go in and get them. So I asked him if he could drop them off with my attorney, which I felt was a safe place.
Okay, why didn't you ask him to drop it off with one of your relatives?
I would have, but at that time, the only person at the house was my grandmother. And I just, they were personal things of my mother's. And the reason I took them was just because I didn't know what was in them, and there were lots of things with my mom's handwriting, and she had a lot of problems in her life. I just wouldn't have handed them to my grandmother because she would have read them all.
Now, how long had you been in possession of this box of letters?
Since right after my parents died.
All right, so from late August then of 1989 until March the 8th of 1990, you had these letters, is that correct?
Right.
And you're telling me that you didn't read those letters?
No, I don't believe so. I mean, I might have looked at them and seen what they basically were, but I believe they were just from gathering them up in the house.
Did this box contain any of the writings that you had read in Calabasas?
I don't believe so, but I really don't know.
Because you hadn't read them?
I glanced through them, and I did not recognize anything like that, but it may have been.
In glancing through them, were you able to pick up what kinds of sentiments were being expressed by your mother?
No.
Was there anything in there from your father?
I don't know. If it was, it would have been just picking it up accidentally because I was trying to get things with my mother's handwriting on them. But so I don't think that there is anything from my father in there. There shouldn't be.
Okay. Now, I believe you indicated earlier in the cross-examination, I believe volume 90 at page 14911, yes, at line 13, counsel, that you segregated some of the writings. Do you remember using the term segregated?
Yes.
Okay, in order to segregate them, you had to know what they were, correct?
Well, I just took, I don't remember exactly what I said there, but I had a bunch of stuff that I took from the house. Just, objects, jewelry, things of that sort. All kinds of stuff, and I believe I had it in a duffel bag, and at some point was keeping it in the apartment. And then everything, I wasn't going to have the apartment anymore, and I was going to ship everything to New Jersey, and I didn't feel comfortable shipping things with my mom's handwriting, so I segregated that from anything else that might have been in there.
Were any of the writings in there letters to you from your mother?
I don't know.
And aside from your mother's writings, what else was in that box?
I believe just my mother's writings.
Did you feel that perhaps if the police searched your Porsche, that they might find that box?
No, I didn't think the box had anything to do with whatever the police were going to charge me with or whatever. I was just concerned about the fact that they happened to be in my car. If they were in the house, I would have just left them there probably, but them being in the car, and also the car was getting some work done somewhere or something, and so I was sort of just nervous that my mother's handwritings, and I've always been concerned after my parents died about personal things getting out. It's one of the reasons I've been very uncomfortable here. And so I've always, even from the first interview, I was concerned about what would get to the press, because I just didn't want certain family members knowing my mother's problems especially, and some of my father's. So I figured among those writings there may be things of that sort, and it'd be better just to keep them somewhere safe.
All right, so you thought that you didn't want anyone reading what your mother was thinking, is that correct? Is that basically it?
Well, I didn't want them to know personal things about my mother that, you know, I wasn't sure what was in there, but I just figured that whatever was in there, because she was very unstable, might be embarrassing for her or something.
And you were afraid there might be something in there as well that might lead people to believe that you had a reason to kill your mother, right?
No.
You weren't afraid of that at all when you asked your girlfriend to get Glenn to get the box out of your Porsche?
No.
Okay, and do you know where the box is now?
I believe it's in the possession of the court at this point.
Will you turn those letters over to us?
Objection, Your Honor. That's an improper question. Will you put your objection?
In regards to the last question and the last answer, the court sustains objections to both the question and the answer, and both the question and the answer are stricken, and the jury is admonished to disregard both the question and the answer.
So, Mr. Menendez, in spite of the fact that you say that you hadn't really read the contents of this box, you wanted to make sure that that Glenn Stevens got it from your car. Is that correct?
Right.
Okay. Now, at some time in early March before your arrest, did you call Mr. Wenskowski to inquire whether or not the Beverly Hills Police had been at your restaurant?
Yes.
Okay. Were you concerned at that time that the police were in fact getting close to arresting you?
No, I had no idea.
Well, when you heard the news that the Beverly Hills Police had a few days before March the 8th gone to your restaurant in the Princeton area, did that concern you?
I have objections, is beyond the scope.
Overruled.
Yes, that concerned me.
And that's why you called Mr. Wenskowski, is that correct?
Probably. I don't know if he had left a message. I guess in just calling the restaurant, I had heard that detectives had been there, and also Mr. Wenskowski with them. And so, and nobody at the restaurant knew anything about it, so I called Mr. Wenskowski to find out, you know, what he knew about it and what was happening.
Okay. Now, you had hired Mr. Wenskowski to be your bodyguard, is that correct?
Right.
And you'd in fact hired the service that he worked for to provide services for you, is that correct?
Right.
All right. Why was it that you felt you needed to have a bodyguard if in fact you knew who had killed your parents?
Because I was concerned with the way the media was presenting what happened, and with the fact that the company had hired bodyguards for the house, or, you know, guards for the house, that some of my father's connections might think that I was feeding the police information that they would not want out. And I was concerned about that. And I expressed that to Detective Zoller, that that's why I had them, because he asked, and I told him.
So before August the 20th, you thought that your father was going to kill you, and after the August the 20th, you thought maybe organized crime might kill you, is that correct?
I thought that they might try to contact us or harm me in some way. I really had no idea, because I didn't think that I knew anything that anybody would be concerned about, but I certainly felt my dad may have been involved in something like that, and they might think I know. And because of all the press saying that it was mafia and this and that, I just felt that they might think that was coming from me, and it was not coming from me. And so I made a point of telling Detective Zoller when I met with him that I didn't think it was the mafia, and that I would like, unless he did, that, you know, that not get out to the press. Yeah.
Right. When was the first time that you noticed that there was a bodyguard protecting you after the death of your parents?
That I noticed, or that I hired?
When did they first get hired from the Bel Air Patrol?
Oh, you mean for the house?
Yes.
I'm not sure.
Okay, and you didn't hire them, the company hired them, correct?
Right,
But when you went back to New Jersey, you hired bodyguards, correct?
right.
Okay. Why didn't you hire bodyguards to protect you from your father?
I just didn't.
Okay, so you thought about it afterwards, but you didn't think about it before, is that correct?
Right.
Okay, now I believe you indicated that at some point you were so concerned about the mafia thinking that you might be saying things about them that you went to a man named Anthony Negri, is that correct?
That's correct.
And that was because Glenn Stevens had indicated to you that this was a person who might have been a friend or who was a friend of his grandfather, is that correct?
I thought it was, he said it was a friend and a business associate of his father's, or past business associate. In fact, they had been involved in some company.
All right, and so when you went to Mr. Negri, it was your state of mind that Mr. Negri was representing the interests of the mafia and could somehow help you to get a message to them, is that correct?
No, he was in the mafia, and I know Glenn said here that he only found that out afterwards, but he knew that at that point. That's why we went to see him, and he looked like he was in the mafia, and he was in charge of a security company there, so we went all the way to New York just to see him.
All right, Mr. Menendez, what does a person look like in your mind who's in the mafia?
Just from the way he talked, very rough, from the way he dressed, and they drove around in these little black Lincoln cars, and he had guys that had carried personal guns, and it just looked, and we went to a restaurant with him, and the guys there hugged and kissed him, and the son that ran the restaurant's father had supposedly been killed by organized crime, and now the son owned the restaurant, and it just seemed very much like it was the mafia. I mean, I wouldn't really know, but
Like in the movies?
yeah, like in the movies.
Okay, so did he have a Jersey accent?
I think he had a New York accent.
Okay, and he had an Italian last name, right?
Right,
And you said he drove around in a dark Lincoln, is that correct?
right.
Okay, now, and he also had people with him who were carrying firearms, correct?
Correct.
Okay, and that made you believe that he was a bona fide, true blue member of organized crime, correct?
Well, I believed Glenn. I mean, if he would have been dressed differently, that would not necessarily have said, okay, I don't believe you, he's dressed in tennis shorts, but it's just that he also fit the description.
So he fit the part, is that correct?
Right.
Now, did you want to get a firearm for Hayden Rogers so that he could bodyguard you more cheaply than Mr. Wenskowski's firm?
I don't believe so, no.
Did you want to get a gun permit for Hayden so that Hayden Rogers could protect you?
No. While we were there, Glenn mentioned something to him about whether he could help Glenn get a license to carry a concealed weapon. And he said that it was very difficult only if you were hired and working at the time. And Glenn said, well, what if I'm protecting Lyle? And you could just say I was working, and you could just say that you were paying me, and so on and so forth. And basically the guy said no.
Now,
It'd be difficult.
this dark car, this Lincoln that Mr. Negri had, was that a limousine or was that just a regular Lincoln?
No, it was a town car.
All right. And during this period of time, you were traveling in limousines, is that correct?
I don't know about that period of time.
But
No, I wasn't.
do you remember Mr. Wenskowski's testimony that you and he traveled in limousines?
Yes.
Okay. And why was it you were traveling in limousines?
That was, I hired the services of D.B. Kelly, and this is what they provided. They provided a limousine, driver, one guard, and a car in the back. And he may have discussed the different options, and I may have picked that one. I don't remember, but my understanding is that was just what they were offering.
Do you remember Mr. Wenskowski testifying that you wanted to buy your own limousine?
Yes.
Okay, because it would have been cheaper than renting one, right?
No, actually, that happened much later, and this was in like right after my parents died. And the limousine thing was in this, like the early spring, when I had lost my driver's license and was having problems, and so I talked to my Aunt Terry about it, and that was how that arose.
The early spring of what year?
Of 90, I guess.
After your parents' death? The spring after your parents' deaths?
Right.
And which driver's license is it that you had lost?
There was discussion with my Aunt Terry about my license situation, and I believe it was either I had a warrant out or something of that sort, and I was having license problems. It was either just suspended or about to be again. And then this discussion about, well, this would solve all the problems. And so we had a brief discussion about that, and I considered the idea, and then I decided not to do it, and I never did.
Okay, so was it your New Jersey license you're talking about, or your California license that you were about to lose in the spring of '90?
I'm not sure. I assume it was my New Jersey license.
Okay, now you testified before that you took your California license and you mailed it back to the DMV. Is that correct?
No, I mailed it to my mother,
Okay.
and she turned it into the DMV, I assume.
Okay, so that was your response to a notice you'd gotten that your license had been suspended, and would you turn over your license voluntarily? Is that correct?
But she sent my Aunt Terry the notice, and Terry explained to me the situation and gave me the notice.
Okay, so are you saying that happened in spring of 1990 or the spring of 1989?
No, that happened in the spring of 1989 with the California license.
Now, when you went to see Mr. Negri, you asked him to do something for you. Is that correct?
Yes.
And what did you ask him to do for you?
Well, I explained to him my concerns with regard to that I didn't know any information about my dad's connections. I had no information, that I was not cooperating with the police, and that I was concerned that people my dad might have known might think that I was, and could he just let people know, if he was able to do that, that I was not going to be cooperating with the police and that I knew nothing, and also find out if there was somebody that was concerned about that out there, and he said he could do that for me.
Now, you were not going to be cooperating with the police because you knew who had done the murders. Is that correct?
That wasn't the reason. I just wasn't going to cooperate with them because I was concerned the way it would look.
Now, I believe you testified as well on direct examination that the reason that you bought the restaurant is that you were at sea, that you didn't have much direction, and that you needed something to give some direction to your life. Would that be fair to say?
That's what my uncles felt, yes.
Okay, and so...
That's what my uncles felt.
And so at some point you decided to buy a restaurant.
Right.
Now, you had wanted to own that restaurant before your parents died, hadn't you?
Restaurants was something that I had been interested in as a kid because my dad at some point was interested in the fast food business and had tried to purchase Burger Kings and so on. But I never, it sort of was like a thing that I thought of when I was much younger, and then had really not thought about it again until after my parents died. Although, well, no, that's not true, actually. I talked about it with Donovan a little bit, too, that one of the things that I might do in the future would be restaurant stuff.
Well, you talked to Donovan specifically about Chuck's Spring Street Cafe as being a good place to franchise. Do you remember his testimony in that regard?
I don't remember him saying that. I don't think that we had any specific plans at all for that, but it's possible.
And Chuck's Spring Street Cafe is the restaurant that you bought and changed the name to Mr. Buffalo's. Is that
Right,
correct?
exactly.
And this this restaurant to give direction to your life, the purchase price was $550,000, wasn't it?
That was the purchase price, and my uncle put down a large portion of it for me, and then the rest was never paid, just went back to the owner.
All right, and this $550,000 restaurant was what was going to help you get over your parents' deaths, is that correct?
I don't think there's anything that's going to help me get over my parents' deaths, but certainly not the restaurant. Just give me more direction.
Did you ever think of perhaps doing something like just getting a regular old job to give you direction?
I thought about a bunch of things. I just thought about, my brother was doing something with tennis, and I was really, had said that, okay, I would go with them and do that, but emotionally I was not able to concentrate and do that. So then I was supposed to go back to school, so I was thinking of doing that, and then I decided to do this. So,
Do you remember the testimony of one of your coaches that you had a discussion with him many years before where you had said you'd always wanted to own a restaurant? Do you remember that testimony?
right.
Okay, so before your father died, you had wanted to own a restaurant, correct?
That was something that was like one of my dreams, was maybe to own a restaurant and make the money myself, though. He also said that. It was no, I'll get it out of my dad or something like that. And my thinking was in the spring before that these were business things that I would do with my dad. He had said that he would give me whatever money was needed if we decided to do business as soon as I graduated. So when he had that conversation with me at my Aunt Terry's, I started to think about, I wonder the different things that we might be able to do. And I talked about it with Donovan, and he knew my dad had made that offer with me. And so one of the things we talked about, I believe, was restaurants.
Okay, and was this during the same time that your father told you he had disinherited you, or was it at a different time that he talked to you about opening the restaurant?
So this is the same period of time where I was out of the will, but the will thing had to do with he didn't want to eventually leave his fortune to me if I was going to be married to the wrong person, is essentially what that. It didn't have anything to do with that I was abandoned or cut off or my life was going to change as far as what he was giving me materially. It didn't have any, it wasn't related to that.
And it didn't have anything to do with the fact that when you left Princeton in the summer of 1989, you were on disciplinary probation? Is that correct, your father?
Right.
And the fact that you were on academic probation, is that correct?
Right.
All right, and it's your testimony here today that you didn't kill your parents for the money, is that correct?
Definitely not.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Menendez, you were asked about Glenn Stevens. Do
Right.
you remember? And Mrs. Buzanich asked you if some time prior to June 8th, 1990, you prepared a document which reflected that you trusted Glenn.
Right.
Remember? Did you trust Glenn at that time?
I trusted all the people that were close to me.
And up to that time, you trusted him?
He was a friend of mine, yes.
Did you reveal to him secrets about your family?
No.
Did you reveal to him that you and your brother had killed your parents?
No.
Did you reveal to him the fact that Dr. Oziel had made tapes of your confession?
No.
Or your conversations regarding this?
No.
So, in spite of the fact that you trusted him, you didn't tell him all of your secrets, is that correct?
No.
Yes,
that is correct, or no, it's not correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay. And you hadn't told anyone that you had killed your parents, with the exception of Dr. Oziel, is that correct?
Right.
And would you have voluntarily told Dr. Oziel that information?
No.
Did you later find out additional information about Mr. Stevens which affected whether you trusted him or not?
Yes.
And did you find out information, was Mr. Stevens running the restaurant for you when you first went to jail? Or working at your restaurant?
He was working there, yes.
And did you find out some information about Mr. Stevens and what he was doing at the restaurant that affected whether you trusted him?
Yes,
What did you find out?
that he was stealing.
You were asked about a limousine and losing your license. Do you remember that?
Yes.
Did your dad always travel in limousines?
Well, not everywhere he went, but there was, in Pennington for a few years, it was limousines everywhere he went.
Was there any...
But then normally it would just be limousines if he felt like he didn't want to drive.
Was there a period of time in which he was using limousines because of some license problems he had?
Yes.
And when was that?
In Pennington, he lost his license, I believe, for 2 years. So he traveled. But for that reason, the company let him drive limousines everywhere.
And when you had the discussion with your Aunt Terry about a limousine, was this because of not having a driver, or the idea that you wouldn't have a driver's license?
Yes, she and I talked about my problems with the license, and essentially I was relying on my Aunt Terry for a lot of advice on things. And she had known about what my dad had done to solve his license problems and get his license back in order. And so we discussed that, and then I just decided not to do that, basically because one of my uncles had said he thought it was a bad idea.
You were asked some questions about your interest in a restaurant.
Right.
And you said that your dad had talked about buying a fast food restaurant
Yes.
earlier in time. Do you remember what restaurant that was?
Burger King.
And do you remember who it was he was going to buy it with? Or who the discussions were with? Do you have any memory?
Well, they were with me, and other relatives knew about it.
Okay. And did restaurants interest you?
Yes.
Did you kill your parents so that you could buy a restaurant?
No.
I have nothing further at this time, Your Honor.
Yes, Mr. Menendez, your father worked for the money that was used to pay for the limousines, is that correct?
Yes.
And your father did not have any inherited wealth, is that correct?
None.
Thank them, nothing further.
All right, let's get the other jury out, please. Yeah, let's get the other jury out. Yeah. All right, we have both juries back in court, and we had hoped to go on with the next witness with both juries before the noon hour, but it's already 1:45, and we wouldn't be able to get very far along. So rather than start now, I'll let you all go. I told you we would not be in session this afternoon, so let me just say a few things, and then we'll let you go for the weekend. The lawyers and I will be here this afternoon, but the juries will not. And while you're away from court, just to remind you not to discuss this case with anyone. Don't form any final opinions about it. Don't permit yourself to be exposed to anything about this case in any form whatsoever outside of the courtroom. And that means don't watch any of the television that might relate to this case. Don't listen to any of the radio that might relate to this case. Don't look at any reading material that might in any way have anything to do with this case. And don't speak with anybody that is in any way talking about this case. You must make your decision based only on what happens here in the courtroom and my instructions on the law. We've noticed recently that a few of you have been bringing the newspaper into the courthouse, into the courtroom, and perhaps into the jury room, and even the newspapers, as you might be aware by just glancing at them, have sometimes articles about this case, and it's very important that you not read those articles, that you not read the headlines even that might relate to this case. So just to follow up on that, when you come into the courthouse and come into the jury rooms and things of that nature. If you do have a newspaper with you that you want to read to occupy yourselves during the times when you're not in the courtroom, and I certainly can understand that you want to do that and keep up on current affairs and also have something to occupy yourself, because there's a lot of time when you're not in the courtroom. Perhaps we can arrange for one of our trustee bailiffs to take your newspapers and remove those articles that might relate to this case and give it back to you, so that then we won't have that problem. So if you want to bring the papers in, we can do that. Hopefully it won't create a problem, but we'll try to work something out where it can be done so that you'll still have some reading material and not be exposed to anything about the matter at all. So again, have a good weekend, and we'll see you all back here Monday at 9 o'clock.